Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. That was the sound of Naruto smashing his alarm clock to pieces as he slowly opened his eyes, to see the wonderful view of both of his wives sleeping on either side of him. Yugito was on his left side and Fu was on his right, both with smiles on their faces as they snuggled into him. He chuckled slightly before deciding it best to wake them by bending his head down. He planted kisses on both of their foreheads, causing them to stir in their sleep. Eventually the pair started to awaken, both yawned in synchronization, to which he found to be cute when both wiped the sleep out of their eyes before they concentrated on him. Smiling back at him, the two women kissed him on lips as their form of mourning. Well, that sure is one way to wake up to a beautiful sight, especially after what we did last night. Naruto smirked as they broke the kiss and winked at his wives, who blushed deeply when they remembered last night's activities. Yugito then lightly slapped him for the comment. Naruto-kun, stop being a pervert. Yugito playfully reprimanded, that only caused all three to laugh lightly. It was then that they caught sight of the clock on the opposite wall and noticed that it was 8 a.m., meaning that they had an hour to get ready before having to meet the captains at the Hueys for their departure to Konoha, a place that Naruto was in no hurry to arrive at all. I think it's time we get up. After all, it wouldn't do good to come late and disappoint everyone, Naruto said as all three began to change into their uniform and eat breakfast. After they ate breakfast, they made their way to the launch deck of the aircraft carrier. On the way they received numerous salutes, to which they returned and proceeded to climb the corridors until they finally reached the launch deck. On the deck, 3 Hueys were stationed in a line, and in the pit were both pilots that were doing final checks on the machines to make sure they were working properly. In front of them stood the captains and 15 soldiers. The 15 soldiers were standing at attention and in 3 ranks of 5. The captains stood a few feet in front and facing them. When they saw Naruto, Yugito and Fu arriving, Akio began the drill. Commanding officer on deck. Salute. She finished yelling as each member of the group saluted their generals. Said generals marched in sync until they stood in the center between the captains and the privates. At ease, men. Naruto ordered as the soldiers withdrew their hands from their foreheads and placed their hands behind their backs whilst widening the space between the legs in a more relaxed stance. Once they were done, Naruto thought it best that he give the advice he had given his captains the previous day, as they would be being inserted into a potential hostile country. They needed to be aware of the tension that was sure to come about whilst in Konoha. Now, first of all, I want the first rank and the first 2 people on the left in the following rank to take 1 step forward. The first rank, containing 5 soldiers, and the other 2 soldiers took 1 step forward completely simultaneously. You 7 will be bodyguards for captains Fujita, Hokkaido, Yamagata, Kyoto, Okayama, Kumamoto and Okinawa. You will defend them until told otherwise by either a captain or general. We will be traveling to Konohagakure and our ETA is 1200 hours. The east is a very hostile area and you will treat everyone there with caution. When we arrive, you will activate your hidden cameras. This will serve mainly as evidence in case you are attacked. In the event that you are attacked, you are allowed to use lethal force. They may also come at you in a mob. If so, use your flares to signal us and stand your ground until reinforcements arrive. When we arrive, we will head to Konoha's Chunin Exam Stadium, where I will face the Konoha 11 in one-on-one matches. You will be guarding the captains in their designated seating area and will prohibit anyone from entering unless given permission by either the captains or generals. After that, we will stay at a hotel where tomorrow the negotiations will continue. Then we will rendezvous with the Hueys, codenamed Hawk, and extract back to HQ. In the meantime, everyone else is to secure the rendezvous point and make sure no one unfavorable tries to sabotage us or gain information on our armed forces. Understood. Naruto finished as he waited for their replies. Sir. Yes, sir. They chorused all together. Right face. Sato stated as the soldiers all turned 90 degrees clockwise so that they were now facing the Hueys. Mount up. Sato continued as each rank marched in sync towards each helicopter and proceeded to board them and check their weapons and other equipment to make sure they were in good conditions. When they were all seated, Naruto, Yugito, Fu and the captains also boarded the Hueys as the rotating blades started to pick up speed and dust. Upon taking his seat, Naruto pressed his right index and middle finger to his ear in order to activate his codec. It was a very advanced form of communications that allowed all of his subordinates to contact him and, if necessary, allow the views of their hidden cameras to appear on his interface. The best part of it was that it practically invisible unless you were up close to him. Okay, we'll be moving in a reverse triangular formation. Hawks 1 and 3 will be at the front whilst Hawk 2 will be at the back, and keep an eye out for anyone suspicious. This applies specifically to those who wear the attire of the Akatsuki or wear an Odo Hite 8. Confirm orders. Sir. Yes, sir, was the resounding response as the Hueys took off and headed towards Konohagakure, with the cheers of the soldiers still on the ship following them across the water. As the helicopter swept past villages, rivers and forestry, Naruto couldn't help but reminisce the experience that he once had with the continent, and despite the fact that he didn't like the hidden villages, he couldn't help but enjoy the feeling of nostalgia as the fresh air whisked past him and he closed his eyes for a moment before sighing in relaxation. Upon opening them again, he looked at the serious expressions on each of his soldiers' faces and had a small flashback on how he got them to be disciplined. Flashback. The hidden villages system is crap. They are too lenient towards them and allow dangerous personalities to come to fruit, especially since they allow them to become legal adults as soon as they pass their Jonin Sensei test. Naruto thought as he stared at his clock and tapped his left index finger on the desk in a smooth rhythm. He noticed these flaws when he thought back on his experiences. Sakura and Ino were allowed to continue their fangirl tendencies. Sasuke was still able to be an avenger. Choji could stuff himself. Shikamaru could still be lazy. Kiba could still be hot-headed. Hinata was still shy. Shino was allowed to invade the privacy of his comrades with his insects. Lee could still be too loud. Tenten was still allowed to only specialize in weapons and not advised to widen her range of jutsu, despite her ability to perform nin, tai and genjutsu. Then finally Neji was still able to rely on his Juken as a Hyuga and was not told to also widen his range of jutsu, especially since his Byakugan and high chakra control, which was required for Juken to be utilized, could be used for medical jutsu to prevent the loss of life when on missions. Each of them had major flaws that could be taken advantage of. No. What Naruto needed was a system that allowed the soldiers relax and be serious when on missions, as well as make them become well-rounded soldiers that could adapt to any situation. Kami, he knew how many times problems had come about on missions because his comrades would allow their faults to rule their decisions, or their weaknesses were exposed and ultimately brought more danger than needed to the mission. Example being Neji's strength was only in Juken whilst his other skills were academy level, or Sasuke and his revenge-driven ego. An idea then came to him as he stopped tapping the table with his finger. That's it, Naruto inwardly shouted, causing him to wake up Kurama from inside his head. What is Kit? He questioned as he took a yawn and stretched out to click his joints in place. I just came up with a system to allow my men relaxation but remain serious on missions and allow them to be adaptive, Naruto replied as the kitsune raised an eyebrow waiting for the answer. How can you do that, Kit? All those ninja in Konoha and the other hidden villages only know discipline when their cages or leaders yell at them. Tours. In peace, each soldier will have 6 months relaxation where they are not required to do any missions and can use the time for themselves whilst also being required to train to meet the standards we give. Then they must spend 6 months on duty and are expected to be serious about it and not allow their personal lives to get in the way. In war, the time spent on duty will be increased due to the constant fighting, and the relaxation period will have to decrease. We will also teach them not to complain, as they would have been trained to accept the risk of discomfort and that they had the choice to not join but did. Lastly, we'll also give tests later on to make sure that they are still fit for service, and anyone who isn't is either retrained or discharged if they reach over the limit of times they're allowed to fail. Kurama thought about the idea and admitted that it had quite a lot of merit to it. It would especially help the UWN avoid the problem of insubordination, and as a result the UWN could avoid the consequences caused by them, such as a war because a soldier killed a high-standing official from a foreign country because they insulted them. He was even more convinced of this when he remembered that some of the shinobi wars were started because of less provocative activities. Okay kid, it sounds like a good idea specifically since it would mean less trouble for you as you do run a nation that rivals all the elemental nations put together, Kurama stated as he went back to sleep. Naruto's sweat dropped at his tenant's ability to just sleep. He had to be lazier than the Naras. Meanwhile in Konoha, a certain pineapple-haired Chunin sneezed, breaking his concentration from the shogi game he was playing and sending the pieces flying over at his ex-sensei. Troublesome, someone must be talking about me. Damn, I was so close to winning that round, sigh. Guess the score is still 100-30 into Shikamaru no less. I knew he was a genius but this takes the rice cake, thought a certain smoking Sarutobi. Anyway, Naruto grabbed his ballpoint pen and started writing down the orders for the new system he wanted implemented for his army. End flashback. It was then that he noticed a wooden crate that was on the helicopter. On top it had the words, "Standard Military Outfit," in big bold impact font, and below it in a smaller font was the list of what it contained. 1X Standard Combat Uniform. AN. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Ranger Outfit, Forest Version. 1X First Aid Kit. 2X Flashbangs. 2X Smoke Grenades. 3X M67 Fragmentation Grenades. 1X Beretta M9. 5x9mm ammunition magazines, 15 rounds per magazine. 1X Stun Knife. 1X Gas Mask. 1X Thermal Night Vision Goggles. 4X Ration Bars. 1X Water Canteen. Plus other necessities. The crate itself was missing the standard Colt M16A2, but Naruto had denied it as he believed that the rifle was only really necessary when facing numerous opponents at once and not in one-on-one fights. Looking towards his wives, he saw that they were staring out over the continent as well. Probably thinking back to their time here as well. He thought before closing his eyes to rest before he would have to face his former comrades. His thoughts were spot on as his wives were thinking back on their time in the elemental nations. Yugito was remembering the only good times she spent with Team Samui that included Karui, Omui and Samui as their leader. Fu was thinking back on her only friend Shibuki, the leader of Takigakure and also a friend of Naruto when he was still a part of Team 7 and was tasked to escort him back to Taki to rule it. In fact, due to unforeseen problems he ended up saving Taki, although his sensei only seemed to praise the other two. Looking back to their husband and then glancing at each other, they both came to the same conclusion. We're not going to let anyone hurt Naruto-kun or either of us because of their bitterness. That we swear on. Meanwhile in Konoha, the Kages, Mifune, the Konoha 11, their sensei, Anko and Iruka were all standing atop the Hokage monument that now had Tsunade's face added to it. Tsunade herself was pacing back and forth, biting her thumbnail every so often with a look of worry on her face. Though nobody who knew of her connection to the blonde Jinchuriki would blame her, as she did view him as a surrogate little brother. The Konoha 11 had mixed feelings. Some people were curious as to what their friend now looked like and how he became a leader to a continent that had basically the same problems as them. These were Shikamaru, Shino, Lee and Choji. Then there were people who were nervous about meeting the man who they had beaten 10 years ago. These were Ino, Hinata, Kiba, Tenten and Neji. Finally there were those who wanted nothing more than to beat the man to a pulp and steal all that he had made to fulfill their own desires, namely Sasuke and Sakura. The Konoha 11 senseis, along with Iruka and Anko, were wondering what the blonde looked like after 10 years, aside from Guy and Kakashi who already knew but refused to divulge any information on him. Many though shivered when they heard Anko whisper to herself all the possibilities that he could look like as well as how he had grown. In more ways than just height-wise. The Kages and Mifune were just thinking of ways of how Naruto could beat any of the Konoha, and so far they couldn't come up with anything. The only thing they thought he could fight with was hand-to-hand combat and weapons, and even then they were sure it wouldn't compare to the Konoha 11 since they can use chakra and he can't. It was 12 p.m. when the Kages, Mifune, Guy and Kakashi heard the familiar chopping sound of the Hueys. They glanced at the others who were looking around wondering what the noise was. "What is that sound?" was the question that was generally being mentally asked amongst those who had not encountered the helicopters. Looking out over Konoha, they saw the Hueys approaching them at high speeds that they themselves would be hard-pressed to match. Those who hadn't seen them before wondered how on earth a nation that had no access to chakra could make something that could achieve flight. A feat that only a few in Iowa could do. They were not the only ones staring up at them in confusion and awe, as many of the Konoha villagers and ninja were thinking the same thing. "What the hell?" they heard Kiba shout as everyone was forced to hunch over slightly as the Hueys started to land in the clearing behind the Hokage monument. As soon as the rotating blades stopped moving, the shinobi and samurai were able to stand at their full height again and gazed at the men and women standing before them. Naruto, his wives and his captains stepped out of their transports first and formed two ranks, Naruto and his wives in the front and his captains behind them. The other soldiers were still on the helicopters unloading the luggage everyone had brought with them. Naruto and his company gave a small bow in respect before he decided to greet the leaders. "Good evening Hokage Dono, Kazekage Dono, Mizukage Dono, Tsuchikage Dono, Raikage Dono and Mifune Dono." He then glanced impassively to the others in the audience, who all shifted slightly, except two who glared at him. Inwardly rolling his eyes at his ex-teammates' childish behavior, Naruto continued his introduction. "Along with me are my commanding officers of the United Whirlpool Military. May I introduce Generals Yugito ni Uzumaki and Fu Uzumaki. After them are my captains. Captain Akio Fujita, commander of the 1st Infantry Squad. Captain Sato Hokkaido, commander of the 2nd Infantry Squad. Captain Takahashi Yamagata, commander of the 3rd Infantry Squad. Captain Inoue Kyoto, commander of the 1st Medic Squad. Captain Yamamoto Okayama, commander of the 1st Airborne Squad. Captain Sakamoto Kumamoto, commander of the 1st Armor Squad. Then finally Captain Kinjo Okinawa, commander of the 1st Supply Squad." Once Naruto had finished, Yugito, Fu and the captains all gave a salute which confused the leaders but responded with a slight bow to show their respect. "Welcome Uzukage Dono. I believe that we should all depart to the stadium where you can change and then we can commence the tournament," Mifune stated monotonously as the Kages and Naruto nodded in response. Turning back to the Hueys, Naruto called out, "You know your orders." At that moment each soldier immediately leapt into action, where 5 of the 7 bodyguards marched to each of their assigned captains, whilst the other 2 picked up the crate and brought it off of the helicopter. The remaining soldiers went about setting up the area so that they could sleep there whilst also being easily able to respond to any attack. The position Naruto and his group formed, where Naruto and his wives were at the front, the captains were behind them, along with the 2 carrying the crate, and the other bodyguards formed a protection circle around. While walking through the village, the group got many confused looks from the populace due to their odd appearance, which changed to glares when they recognized their leader. The Kages and their group were sweating slightly when they saw the looks being given and hoped that none of them would try anything stupid. "Hey, isn't that the Kyuubi brat? Monster should have died. They should be arrested and executed just for existing. No doubt those other people are being controlled by some genjutsu." As the insults continued being whispered, the ninja of the group who cared about Naruto and his company started to sweat even more. Some even took a moment to observe their reactions. To their surprise, none of their guests were showing any physical reaction to the negative treatment. They could tell through their eyes that they were annoyed, but other than that, nothing. Most of their own would have showed some kind discomfort, but these UWN soldiers were acting as if nothing was going on, though they did tense when the looks changed from curiosity to hostile. Soon they arrived at the stadium that was currently empty but would be full of people once the matches began. "All right, now that we have arrived we can begin. Uzukage dono, you and your men carrying the equipment may go to the changing room to change and then go the arena where you will face the Konoha 11. Your generals, captains and their bodyguards may sit with us in the cage box. From there on we will begin the matches, Tsunade said as Naruto nodded and motioned for the privates holding the crate to follow him. Time skip. 2 hours later. The stands were packed with both civilians and shinobi, with the cages and Naruto group being on the cage box that had been expanded to better accommodate the extra weight. Seeing that everyone was in position, Tsunade stood up and began the announcement. Welcome everybody. Today the Shinobi Alliance has arranged for a tournament between Konohagakure's Konoha 11 and the United Whirlpool Nation's Uzukage, Naruto Uzumaki. At the mention of the Konoha 11 many cheered, but they changed to boos and many other negative insults when they heard who the Uzukage was. Demon. We should have kill. Silence. Tsunade shouted, quietening the crowds with a burst of ki. Once they were settled down, Tsunade went back to announcing the part of the bet. Now this was decided because the effectiveness of the Uzukage's military was brought into question. In response, a challenge was presented. The Uzukage will face the Konoha 11 in one-on-one battles. Should he lose to any of them, his nation will be under the immediate control of the Shinobi Alliance, but if he defeats them all, then Uzushiogakure will become a part of the United Whirlpool Nation. Now let's proceed to the first match. Tsunade finished as she received cheers from the people in the stands. When she sat back down, she turned towards Kakashi and the other Jonin sensei who were stationed as the guards for the cages during the event. So Kakashi, what was the layout of the matches that your students decided on? Looking over to his superior, the copy nin gave her his patented eye smile, which really annoyed people since so far nobody had seen his face other than his late father, late mother and the late medic nin that saw him at birth. Well, Hokage-sama, apparently the Konoha 11 still think that Uzukage-sama still has a crush on Sakura and that should be enough to win. After her it is Ino, Hinata, Tenten, Shikamaru, Shino, Choji, Kiba, Lee, Neji and then Sasuke. Tsunade raised an eyebrow at the statement about Sakura. First match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Sakura Haruno. Begin. But isn't Naruto Ulrea winner? Naruto Uzumaki. What? Minutes earlier, Naruto walked out of the dark hallway into the arena where he was met with the familiar scene of the forest clearing that he had been competing in to become a Chunin over a decade ago. It looked cleaned, and although many of the trees and plants had been replaced and moved around, it didn't stop the small flashback he had that showed his match with Neji. He was no longer wearing his armor but instead wore the standard combat uniform for his soldiers. On his right hip was the holster for his M9 and on his lower back was his stun knife placed horizontally. Also he had his other various pieces of equipment on his person with easy access to them. Walking into the arena full of confidence that wasn't backed up by mere arrogance, but instead confidence that was supported by skills. When he heard the comments made about him when he was announced, he mentally shook his head at the stupidity that had come about. It made him think how blind or idiotic the previous Hokages could have been if they believed Konoha to care for all of its inhabitants like family when they have shown time and time again that they don't care about anybody if it was only slightly not human. To add insult to the injury, the civilians are trying to control the shinobi as if they were their servants, and if they were challenged they would say the demon is controlling them. Then again, he hasn't seen firsthand what the village was like before the Kyuubi attack, so he couldn't judge them on that, though he was not allowing them to use that as an excuse for what they had done. They had been told to treat him like a hero by their prized Yondaime and they spat on it. Whatever happens to them is because of their own doing, not the Hokage's. Upon seeing who the proctor would be for the tournament, he turned a bright red at seeing Anko Mitarashi, standing in the center of the clearing in the same outfit she had worn during the Chunin exams. It was always baffled him on how she could wear something like that and not in the least feel insecure about it. When said woman turned and saw Naruto standing there, she gave him a big grin that seemed to stretch across her face. Hey there, stud. So you ready for your first match? Yeah, I'm ready. Let's get this show started then. Naruto nodded, giving a smile back to the snake using kunoichi. Right. By the way, when this is over, do you want to get some dinner together after this? She asked in surprisingly nervous tone. Raising an eyebrow, Naruto thought back on his interactions with the woman. She wasn't mean to me like everyone else, and in fact she is treated to a lesser extent like me because of her past affiliation with Orochimaru, so maybe, he thought before replying. Sure, but anything further and we will need to talk to Fu-chan and Yugito-chan about it. I don't want to start dating anyone that would upset my two wives, so it will be their decision overall. Sighing, Anko nodded in response. She knew it would be difficult, but it didn't stop her. In fact, she saw it as a kind of challenge. To be honest with herself, she had had a slight crush on the blonde when she was assigned to be his hidden guard when his birthday came about. He wasn't beaten constantly, just on his birthdays that coincided with the Kyuubi's attack. Other than that, though, he was ripped off when shopping, if he was even allowed to shop there in the first place. He was insulted by just about everyone in the village and was sabotaged in the academy by the teachers, except for Iruka. In fact, Naruto in a way had suffered worse than Gaara did, despite saying otherwise during the Chunin exams. This was because even though everyone knew about Gaara's status, he was never actually beaten because of Shukaku. He certainly wasn't ripped off by store owners, and he knew who his parents were despite thinking that they hated him. The only thing that he had over Naruto in that department was that he was robbed of sleep, which was fixed recently when the Aikibi was ripped out of him and Lady Chiyo sacrificed herself to bring him back to life. Back to the subject at hand, before any of them could continue, they heard footsteps from the other side of the clearing. Naruto Baka, quit harassing the proctor, Sakura said as she scowled and stomped towards the center. Naruto's response was to just put on a blank expression. Once they were all ready for the fight, Anko went over the rules. Now the rules of these fights will be as follows: everything goes. The match will only end when one gives up, is unconscious, is dead, or I step in. Naruto Uzumaki cannot use any chakra-based jutsu. Lastly, there must be no outside interferences. Failure to comply with these rules will result in automatic disqualification. Understood. Receiving two nods in acceptance, Anko raised her right hand above her head. First match: Naruto Uzumaki vs Sakura Haruno. Begin. Anko brought her hand down and jumped out of way to avoid the charging banshee that was Sakura Haruno. Cha, I'm going to beat your face in for surpassing Sasuke-kun, she shrieked as she charged in with a sloppy left hook, intent on crushing his skull with a fraction of Tsunade's strength. Naruto remained stock still with that blank look on as Sakura closed the distance between the two. 10 meters. 5 meters. 2 meters. Cha! Sakura shouted as she swung her fist at the blonde. Naruto sidestepped to the right and delivered a hard elbow blow to the back of her neck, causing her to be temporarily stunned and hunch over as she lost her balance. Naruto then raised his right knee and struck right in the solar plexus, causing her gasp as her breath was robbed from her, as well as causing her to throw up her lunch. The pain was too much for the dieting, physically weak medic Nin and passed out, falling none too gracefully into a puddle of her vomit that smelled awful. Seeing that the pinkett was out for the count, Anko shouted, "Winner, Naruto Uzumaki." In the cage box. Seems like they were wrong. Onoki snorted as the other cages nodded in agreement as Sakura was taken off the field by stretcher bearers. Meanwhile, the captains of the United Whirlpool military were snickering at the match. They hadn't seen anything so pathetic in their lives. Even fresh soldiers fought better than that when they started training. Back in the arena, Naruto and Anko were sorting out the finer details of their date when they saw Ino approaching. When both of them were ready, Ino wanted to apologize for her and the others' treatment of him before his exile. Naruto, before we start, I want to say we're all sorry about what we did to you before you were banished. Can you please forgive us for our foolishness? Her response was for Naruto to close his eyes and sigh. To be honest, he didn't want to bring this up until after the fights, so he decided it was best to answer the girl with something along those lines. Yamanaka-san, this is not the time, nor the place to be discussing this kind of sensitive topic. I will speak to you and the others when the fights are over, he replied as he got into his fighting. Withdrawing the stun knife that was sheathed horizontally on his lower back, he proceeded to stand with his right leg in front of his left, held the knife in the reversed grip in front of him along with an open left hand and crouched slightly. Ino nodded and got into her family's stance as Anko came up to begin the battle. Second match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Ino Yamanaka. Begin. Ino threw several shuriken at the blonde before blurring through hand seals as she performed her clan's most famous jutsu. Shintenshin no Jutsu. Ino shouted, her hands in a triangle-like shape and aiming at her fellow blonde opposite her. Up in the competitor's box. Damn it, Ino, that jutsu won't work. Shikamaru cursed as he facepalmed at her carelessness. What do you mean? Choji questioned, who was munching on some crisps that he had brought with him. Choji, that jutsu requires the target to be immobilized because of the backlashes it demands. In the beginning her mind moves slowly and in a straight line, so all Naruto has to do is dodge to avoid being affected. Then as it takes time for her mind to return to her body, Naruto can walk right up to her prone form and it's game over for Ino. It's the reason why we have the Ino Shika Cho trio, because it's our jobs to keep our targets from moving so she can get a clear shot. Shikamaru groaned as he took out a cigarette and lit it before taking a puff. Back in the arena. True enough, that is what exactly was happening, for as soon as Ino finished her jutsu, Naruto dive rolled to the right and ran straight to Ino's prone form. He then placed his stun knife at her neck and Anko decided to call the match. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. Anko shouted as many of the ninja from the other villages cheered for the good fight, whilst everyone from Konoha were still stunned as they couldn't realize that the man down there was the same teenager they mistreated 10 years ago. As Ino came to, it took her a moment to realize that she had lost. Getting up, she walked over to the exit. Just before exiting, she looked over her shoulder towards Naruto. Naruto, promise you will speak with the Konoha 11 after this. We really want to apologize for what we did. And I said yes, now go, we have another match to do. Naruto replied as Ino nodded and finally was out of his view, only to be replaced by a blushing Hinata. Once everyone was ready, Anko began the next fight. Third match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Hinata Hyuga. Begin. For a moment neither of them moved, until Naruto moved his hands to his shirt and started to remove it. Phew. It's hot. In fact, it's so hot I need some more air, he said as his shirt was halfway off, causing a lot of females to blush at his toned abs and chiseled chest and many males to glare in jealously. Naruto-kun, hot. Hinata muttered as she pressed her index fingers and tried to get rid of the blush on her face. Soon it was too much for shy and timid Hinata, and it was much worse as she started having perverted thoughts. The result was her blasting off from a geyser of a nosebleed and pass out from both blood loss and the impact from falling. Naruto smirked as he put his shirt back on as everyone else sweat dropped at the victory. At seeing everyone's faces, he scowled. Hey, not my fault she's weak against my physique, Naruto said as everyone was snapped out of their dazes. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki? Anko asked uncertainly as she was also in a daze, but not from Hinata's loss. The stadium stayed quiet as Hinata was carried out of the arena as Tenten took her place. They may have been beaten easily, but I can assure you that you'll break a sweat facing me, she stated boldly as she got into a fighting stance. Good. Was all Naruto said as he too got into a fighting stance. Fourth match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Tenten. Begin. Anko shouted, this time jumping away as she knew Tenten's jutsu were of the widespread kind. Indeed, she was right. Almost as soon as she had began the fight, Tenten had already brought out her sealing scrolls and proceeded to unseal her weapons from them as they sailed at the ex-Konoha shinobi. Unlike the others, Naruto was forced to dodge or deflect her weapons as they came flying at him from almost all directions, though it was easy for him to do so judging from the smirk on his face. Good, get annoyed so that she uses that big scroll on her back. Then I can go on the offensive, he thought as he dodged a kunai that missed him by a centimeter. Tenten though was getting frustrated. She had thrown all kinds of weapons at him only for him to either dodge or deflect him with that strange knife of his. Upon looking at it, she knew it was a high-quality weapon and would have had stars in her eyes if she wasn't in the middle of fight right now. Looks like I'm going to have to use that, she growled as she jumped on top of the farthest wall and took off the large scroll on her back. Good, she's doing it, Naruto thought as he pulled out an M67 frag grenade and took off the safety pin but kept the safety lever on. Tenten threw the scroll overhead, shouted out one of her most powerful attack. Sogu Tensasi. The sky literally became black from all the tools raining down on Naruto, who finally let go of the safety lever and tossed it at where Tenten was following the barrage. Boom. The resounding explosion caused many to gawk at the power behind it. It was twice as powerful as an explosive tag. How on earth did Naruto design that? Was the general thought going through the cages and ninja. Though there were plots of stealing the technology from a certain Raven, Pinkett and Council. But that wasn't the end of it. No, in fact the shock wave caused by the explosion caused the weapons to go flying off course, leaving Naruto fine in the middle of a circle, surrounded by Tenten's weapons. Speaking of Konoha's weapon mistress, Tenten lay unconscious on the floor with multiple burn and stab wounds caused from the heat and shrapnel from the grenade. As she was carried away, Anko let out a whoop of joy. Finally, some actual fighting is happening. I was afraid Naruto-kun would be able to win this without even trying. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki, Anko shouted in joy as said blonde chuckled at her antics. Cage box. It looks like Uzukage Dono's military are competent. Wouldn't you agree, Tsuchikage Dono? Mei specifically asked Onoki, who humphed and looked in another direction, though on the inside he was regretting his decision with every victory. Naruto's captains and wives were smirking at the complete awe shown to something they considered a minor tool. Imagine their surprise if they saw a nuke, was their general thought as each one laughed inwardly. Arena floor. Damn, you're cutting through them like butter. Are you sure you're not cheating? Anko mocked as Naruto laughed heartily at her. No, Anko-chan, I can assure you that I am not cheating. The reason why I am winning is because I am mainly using tactics. Whereas most of the ninja today use flashy jutsu and have honor, I do not. To me it's about doing the job right, and the only time this won't happen is if civilians or hostages are involved, as I would focus on their safety, and unlike the hidden villages here, who make the shinobi look like heroes, all of my soldiers are taught both the good and bad about the military. They know that heroes are only made by the leaders, when in fact all it was them defying the odds. Take the Yondaime Hokage for example. The possibility of winning against an army is small with one man, but with the Hiraishin he won against the odds, and so he was named a hero. What they fail to realize though, that one man's hero is another man's villain. Whilst in Konoha he is seen as a hero because he saved a lot of Konoha ninja, in Iwa he is seen as a villain because of the Iwa ninja he slaughtered, causing pain for any loved ones or relatives back home. Naruto informed Anko as the next opponent, Shikamaru, turned up. Troublesome. Let's get this over with, he drawled out as both took fighting stances. Fifth match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Shikamaru Nara. Begin. For a minute or two neither combatant did anything until Naruto spoke up. Hey Nara-san, you don't look like you want to be here, so why don't you just drop out? After all, you won't gain anything you could use, Naruto asked in rhetorical tone as he rolled his neck in preparation. Fine, I forfeit. As soon as the words processed through everyone's heads, they all face vaulted and started shouting obscenities at the lazy genius. Naruto and Anko were standing there with wide eyes and mouths open as they couldn't believe that actually worked. Oh okay. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. Anko stammered out as everyone continued to insult the Nara as he walked back to the Konoha 11. I can't believe that actually worked, I was only joking, I didn't think he would actually do it, Naruto quietly said. Both Proctor and combatant shook their heads to keep their focus on the topic at hand. Competitors box. Shikamaru, you lazy, you didn't even try anything. Ino scolded Shikamaru as he gave her a blank look. If you had been looking more carefully, you would have seen that I had him trapped in my Kajimane no Jutsu. However, when he rolled his neck without me doing it first, I know my jutsu wouldn't even faze him. Ergo, no need to fight a match that would be too troublesome. Shikamaru intelligently spoke as he took another cigarette and lit as he gazed down to continue watching the fights, ignoring the looks being sent at him from the others. Down in the arena, you know at the rate you're going at, we could schedule our date for as soon as this test finishes, Anko said as Naruto shrugged his shoulders in response. It was then that they spotted Shino coming down to begin his match. It's good to see you, Naruto-sama, after such a long time, Shino said monotonously whilst giving a small bow in respect. You too, Aburame-san. Naruto replied, mirroring Shino's bow as both took up their positions. Sixth match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Shino Aburame. Begin. As soon as Anko had finished her announcement, insects started to fly towards Naruto, who remained still again as before. Up in the cage box. What is Uzukage Dono doing? Surely he knows that what he is doing is a great risk. Mei questioned as the other cages apart from the Tsunade nodded in agreement. Just because it is a large risk doesn't mean that it will fail, it means that the likelihood of success is small. Naruto, however, has proven that every single time this has happened to him, he pulled it off. Tsunade said as the others thought back on what they know of him. We said the same thing when we first saw him, but now look at him. He united all of our nations and peace has been achieved there. Unlike this place. Akio added, muttering at the end to only allow her companions to hear it, causing them to snicker slightly. With Naruto and Shino, Naruto waited until all of the insects covered him entirely. He then discreetly pushed the button on the stun knife to activate electrical shock to be initiated. On cue, all of the insects let out a loud screech as they burned, and Shino was too shocked to do anything against it as the surge traveled across them and back to him, shocking him as well. Soon it became too much and he collapsed from the pain, both physical from the electricity and the fact that his insect colony was almost destroyed. The crowds were once again stunned by the fight. They thought he couldn't use jutsu, but he hadn't used any chakra. Therefore, somewhere along the line he had found a way to use lightning without the need of chakra. It was shocking to say the least. The cages themselves were in the same state of mind. Many of them were just blank on the inside as they were still staring in awe at what had transpired. Naruto's group, though, were laughing internally at the looks everyone had. It seemed that they believed everything relied on chakra. Boy, were they in for a wake-up call. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. Damn, I'm bored having to repeat that. Anko ended complainingly. Don't worry, there's only 5 matches after that. I would like to treat you to a homemade dinner, Naruto said as Anko licked her lips in anticipation. Can I join? A voice questioned as the pair looked to see Choji appear in his samurai armor. Sorry, Akamichi-san, that's for a date. Now let's begin, Naruto stated as he stood in his combat stance again. Choji nodded and did the same. 7th match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Choji Akamichi. Begin. Choji was about to start doing hand seals until he saw Naruto take out a ration bar and start eating. What are those? Choji asked in curiosity. Oh, just a protein bar. Helps with conserving energy. Want one? Naruto finished, handing out one of the bars towards the unsuspecting Choji. Sure. Choji replied as he took one and ate it. As soon as the food touched his tongue, his eyes narrowed and his face turned a shade of green as he threw it away and started throwing up. He was too preoccupied with trying to keep his lunch that he didn't notice Naruto walk up to him and knock him out with a simple chop to the neck. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. What was that you used against him? Poison. Anko added as she finished announcing the winner. Grinning, Naruto brought up the ration bar that he had given Choji. Nope. The food was just horrible. You see, those were emergency food rations. They're kind of like the soldier pills, except it replenishes the body's energy instead of chakra. The problem with them, though, is that they taste terrible or tasteless, but hey, my men are trained to eat stuff like this until they can eat with a straight face like I did then, Naruto said as Anko took a bite from the one he had eaten. Almost immediately she spat it out again, making retching sounds, but not actually throwing up. That's crap. This should be used for torturing people, not as an emergency food supply. She choked, throwing the pathetic excuse for food back to Naruto, who shrugged and finished it. This prompted Anko to make gagging noises to mock him, to which he returned with shaking his head with closed eyes and a small smile. Cage box. You know, if that kind of food can even make an Akamichi vomit, then I really don't want to try it, Gaara said in his usual monotone voice. The other cages agreed quickly, deducing the same as the cage. You're not the only ones, was the thought process of Naruto's group. Despite their experience and tolerability with the stuff, it still tasted horrible. Arena. Hey Naruto, good to see you again, buddy. Arf, Kiba and Akamaru said simultaneously as they both stood opposite Anko and Naruto, who were discussing some everyday things about their lives. Naruto, though, looked blankly at the pair before he spoke in a rather cold tone. Inuzuka-san, do not speak to me in a friendly tone. After what you and some others did, you have no right to address me in such a familiarity voice. If you must address me, it will be either Uzumaki-sama or Uzukage-sama. Now let's begin the match. Both of his opponents flinched at his statement, but got into fighting stances nonetheless, indicating that they were ready. 8th match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Kiba Inuzuka. Begin. Kiba took out a soldier pill and tossed it to Akamaru, who swallowed it and his fur started turning red. Giju Ninpo. Shikyaku no Jutsu, Kiba yelled as he started to gain more canine attributes which were essential for using his clan's taijutsu. Flashing through hand seals, he got down on all fours as a chakra aura started to show. When he finished them, he was now surrounded by chakra-like flames as he called out his next jutsu. Akamaru then disappeared in a poof of smoke, only to be replaced with an exact twin of Kiba. He was also in the same all-fours position as the original. This trick again. Come on, this is going to be boring. Although I don't want to push my luck since I am only wearing standard gear here and not my customized gear. That does remind me, I need to check in with Gunsmith and see if my order is completed. I don't like that 5.7 I carried when I first arrived. Though I admit it is a good gun, it just doesn't suit my style, and this Beretta M9 doesn't even compare to what I ordered, Naruto thought as he stared off into the distance with a bored look on him. Upon see how bored Naruto was, Kiba exploded. What's up with you? Don't ignore me, he shouted as he snapped Naruto out of his daze. Oh, it's just you, Inuzuka-san. Could you please not yell? I'm trying to think here. Naruto dismissed as he was intentionally doing it in order to enrage Kiba. It appeared to be working as both Kibas frowned deeply at the dismissal Naruto gave them. We'll show you not to underestimate us. Jujin Taijutsu Ogi. Gatsuga, the original Kiba yelled as both lunged at Naruto whilst transforming into miniature tornadoes that would rip anything that touched them to shreds. Naruto smirked as he took out the pin to the smoke grenade and dropped it on the floor, causing a gray cloud of smoke to fill the arena, blocking everyone's view in the process. Cage box. Why would Naruto do that? I read the reports of his Chunin exam preliminary match and it said Kiba did the same thing and almost won because of it. What does he gain from giving Kiba the advantage? Tsunade said as the other cages looked to her in confusion before looking back to fight in the arena. This what you come up with? Man, you must still be the dead last if you think this will work. I mean, how can you forget what happened at the Chunin exams? I'll still find you, Kiba said as he was his enhanced senses to locate Naruto from within the smoke. With the Konoha 11, why is Naruto making a rookie mistake of allowing Kiba to easily find him when he is relying on sight mostly? Ino asked as the rest of the Konoha 11, minus Shikamaru, nodded in agreement. Sighing, Shikamaru decided to re-enlighten them on how Naruto has been fighting so far. This is too troublesome to say, but look back on how Naruto's been fighting his matches presently, he said as the others thought about what he meant. It was Neji who answered him. He has been using deception, Neji said. Nodding towards the Hyuga, Shikamaru continued. Right. So don't assume he is being stupid because whatever he did it for a purpose, he stated as the others looked back towards the fighting arena. The smoke was clearing and Kiba could clearly see Naruto, but now he was wearing a gas mask and his thermal goggles, not that he knew that. What the s that? Kiba demanded as he heard a muffled chuckle come from Naruto. Well, Kiba, this is known as a gas mask and what it does is allow me to breathe in a cloud of poison gas, which just so happens to have been the cloud we were in just a moment ago, Naruto informed Kiba in a slightly cheerful voice. But neither Akamaru or I could smell anything in the smoke, Kiba protested, getting a nod along with the transformed Akamaru. In response, Naruto spread his arms out in a kind of, I don't give a crap, look. Doesn't matter to me. I'm safe with this mask on and you should be feeling the effects of the poison, right, about, now, Naruto stated. As soon as the words passed his lips, Kiba immediately felt his right arm fall limp and go numb. He couldn't move it no matter how much effort he put into moving the limb. He's right. Kiba whispered to his partner, who whined in worry. I can give you the antidote if you surrender and forfeit the match, or you can continue to try and win and I will keep avoiding you until you drop dead and I win anyway. So which will it be? Naruto asked, trying to keep any humor out of his voice. To many who knew Naruto from Konoha, this was surprising considering they believed that he would never try to kill a comrade. Though many who personally knew Naruto believed that even though it was unlikely, it wouldn't be surprising, especially with what happened before he was thrown out of Konoha. Thinking over his options, Kiba decided to not risk and raised his hand. I forfeit. He reluctantly said as Akamaru transformed back into his original form. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki, Anko announced, though nobody applauded because although the match was over, the case of Kiba's poisoning was still their main concern. Well, give me the antidote, quickly before the poison kills us, Kiba yelled as Akamaru barked in agreement. Naruto then gave a sheepish grin. There isn't any. What? Kiba shouted, angry that he was tricked and would die for it. Naruto, seeing this, decided to explain before there was a stadium-wide panic. There was no poison either. I used the first rule for ninja, deception. I convinced you that the smoke was poisonous and that I was safe because of the gas mask, when in reality all it was a large smoke bomb. But what about his arm? Anko asked as she too was curious about how Naruto made Kiba's arm numb. Naruto then pulled out a small syringe with the word, morphine, written on it. This is known as morphine. It is used for treating battle wounds that are gained in a fight. When someone is wounded, the pain is numbed by injecting this into the opposite limb to where the wound is. It then nullifies the pain receptors around the wound so that the brain doesn't register the wound there. This way men don't shout out in pain and give away their location and don't die from shock, but the downside is that the whole limb is numb to the point of being useless. I injected it into you when you were in a rage in the smoke so that you didn't register it. I found you in the smoke by using my thermal goggles, points to the goggles on his head, to track your heat signature. Naruto finished explaining. Many of the medic nin and doctors were looking on in awe at the medical tool. They could really use that to allow patients relief from the pain they endure when out on missions. Tsunade herself wondered if it would be possible to arrange a trade for them. The other cages were along similar lines, though more for what Naruto used it for in combat. After all, being able to make an enemy collapse from numbness would help them a great amount. With the Konoha 11, see, told ya he had something cooked up. This whole thing has become too troublesome if you ask me, Shikamaru said as he finished his latest smoke. The Dobi's been lucky, so what? He won't beat me in Uchiha Elite, was the arrogant Uchiha's statement, which caused all the other occupants Shikamaru, Lee and Neji to glare at him. Knowing he was outnumbered, Sasuke scoffed and went back to scowling at the blonde Uzukage as Lee made his way down to the arena. What is it you plan on cooking for me, Naruto-kun? Anko Kudas gave Naruto an innocent look that most men were unable to resist. Keyword being most. Anko-chan, I'll tell you later, but I think Lee-san would like for the match to start, Naruto said as Lee gave him his signature, Good guy, pose. Yes, I do believe we should begin this youthful match between two youthful fighters. If I can't win, then I will do 200 laps of Konoha. If I can't do that, I will do 400 push-ups, and if I can't do. Shut up. We know already. Everybody shouted towards Lee as everyone knew to cut him off before he and Guy did their most dangerous genjutsu. Hugging each other on the beach during a sunset. Lee blushed from embarrassment before he stood in his ideal fighting stance, the Goken. Naruto withdrew his stun knife and once again took up his combat stance. Anko, seeing that both of them were ready, raised her hand. Ninth match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Rock Lee. Begin. Lee leapt at Naruto with Med-Jonin speed and threw a fast right jab that Naruto ducked under. Lee was about to aim a kick but was surprised when he felt Naruto stab his knife into his right calf. He vaguely saw Naruto press a button on the knife until his whole world suffered from pain and from the same electric shock that Shino had received, but got the full power of it rather than a diluted version that Shino got due to him being in direct contact with the knife. Soon the pain was too much and he passed out. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki, Anko said as cheers came from many of the foreign shinobi present and boos from the Konoha residents. I know the fight with Lee was disappointing, but I couldn't find any names for the techniques he used, so I wanted to wrap his match up quickly. Both Anko and Naruto rolled their eyes at the Konoha residents and wondered how the negotiations were going to go if Konoha had a mindset like this as a whole. As Lee was carried off and out of the clearing, Neji took his place and got into his Juken without even speaking a word and activated his Byakugan. He knew that Naruto was not in a speaking mood for the Konoha 11, especially those who abused him before he was thrown out of Konoha. His aim so far was to beat Naruto in this fight. Once Naruto was ready as well, Anko decided to start the second to last match. 10th match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Neji Hyuga. Begin. Almost immediately Neji lunged with a Juken strike to Naruto's right shoulder, to which Naruto sidestepped and both began a series of taijutsu blows, blocks, dodges, counter blocks and counter attacks. To the audience it was astounding that Naruto was facing down one of the most effective taijutsu with little to no effort being needed. Neji was getting annoyed as his prized Juken was completely obsolete against the blonde who dodged or deflected all of his attempts to shut down his chakra network. How is he doing this? The Juken is supposed to be one of the most prized taijutsu style, and this man is easily avoiding it, and he isn't even using any jutsu, just that knife and taijutsu. Neji thought as he made one last effort to Juken strike his stomach, only for Naruto curve around his outstretched palm and landed a punch to his head, causing him to stagger slightly. That's another thing, his punches are even more powerful than Lee's. If it wasn't for the fact that Naruto was banished, I would have thought Tsunade taught him her super strength, he mentally added. Naruto meanwhile was waiting for Neji to pull a certain stance that would give him the opportunity to counter and end the match. During all of this he kept one of his hands close to the assortment grenades he had as the fight dragged out. A couple of minutes later Neji was getting agitated, decided to use something from the Chunin exams as he jumped a few yards away before he got into a different stance that all the Hyuga recognized right away. Naruto though mentally grinned as he saw the stance. Now to put my plan into action, he thought as he reached to back of his belt and grabbed something that went unnoticed by everyone else. You are within my range of divination. Hake Hyaku Nuhachi Sho, Neji called out as he charged at the blonde Uzukage. Only to see a small device being thrown right into his view. He quickly glanced at Naruto, to see him closing his eyes and covering his ears. Instinctively he did the same, but two things prevented this. Firstly, he forgot to deactivate his Byakugan, and secondly, he didn't cover his ears in time. The result was for him to be blinded by a large flash and to go deaf from a loud bang that rang through his ears. It didn't help that the Byakugan enhanced his vision qualities, so he felt the effects more than a normal person would. Falling back from seeing white and being slightly deaf, he wasn't aware of Naruto's fist smashing into his face, sending him skidding a few feet away before he was unconscious. Naruto grinned as he pulled his fist back to his side. What happened there, Naruto-kun? I saw a flash and heard a loud bang, then I see Neji knocked out. Anko asked, cradling her head slightly to steady herself. Well, you see. When Neji charged at me, I threw what is called a flashbang. It temporarily blinds and deafens the enemy to disorientate them. Thanks to this I got an opening and all it took was a hard punch to put him out. Naruto explained as Anko laughed at the grin he was showing. You're good at this shit. Anyway, one more and then we go on our date. Anko said as they saw the last of the Konoha 11 come down. When Sasuke came out onto the field he still had that wise smirk of his he always wore when he was convinced that he would win. He had his arms folded over his chest as he casually walked into the arena with an air arrogance surrounding him. Naruto's eyes narrowed at the sight of the man that had caused him to be thrown out of Konoha. Though I think I should thank him for that, as I did find a better place to go to and marry my 2 wives, Naruto thought as he went to stand next to Anko. In his mind he heard Kurama growl at the Uchiha. That waste of space. Kit, do me a favor and humiliate that bastard. I still have a bone to pick with that damn clan, especially after what Madara did to me both when he was facing that Senju and Namikaze. Kurama angrily said as he saw through Naruto's eyes the Uchiha flare his Sharingan. When the Konoha villagers and ninja saw the legendary Sharingan, they all cheered and praised him. On the outside, Sasuke looked like he wasn't paying attention, but Naruto knew that all of the time he had known the Raven Head he always wanted attention and that right now he was mentally grinning. So Dobi, ready to lose to me again as like all the other times, he mocked as many others laughed at Naruto, thinking that it would make him do something rash and be disqualified. Yet I was the one to bring you back to Konoha, Uchiha-san. Please spare me any unsavory comments and let's begin. Naruto said as he moved his hand towards his stun knife again and he was about grab it when Sasuke decided otherwise. Don't you dare insult me, an Uchiha elite. I bet the Yondaime and his wife didn't even want you, considering they died just to get away from you. They didn't want to live with a demon, so they killed themselves. Ha, ha. Sasuke laughed as many of the Konoha residents laughed as well, whilst the foreigners believed that that was uncalled for but didn't say anything. Naruto bowed his head slightly so that his hair obscured his eyes from view, and his right hand that was reaching for his stun knife redirected itself to take out the Beretta M9 and held it in front of him. He then used his left hand to pull the slide back to see that a round was chambered. Releasing the slide, he took the safety off and stood in position. This time though it was different, it was more casual, with his legs being slightly apart and his hands by his sides. Cage box. Uchiha-san should not have done that, Yugito stated as the other cages turned towards her. What do you mean? Tsunade asked, as even though she disliked the Uchiha, it was still her duty to look after him as well as all her other ninja, both as the Hokage and a medic nin. It's because of the weapon Naruto has now, drew. Fu added as the cages looked to her now, looking for more information. Seeing that she now had their attention, Fu decided to continue. You see, when he was tortured by people who he trusted a lot and prayed would stand by him in his moment of need. Tsunade winced at that. Something in him broke, Fu drew out at the end. And because of that, Naruto developed a mental mode called killer mode. What it means is that he loses all other thoughts and goes into a kind of trance. No love, happiness or kindness. In fact, there isn't even any negative emotions like anger or rage. All there is one thing: kill. At one point Naruto was outnumbered by enemies, and to combat them he entered this mode, and let's just say it made the Uchiha massacre look tame. Yugito finished for Fu as the cages turned back to look at Naruto more closely. Arena. When Yugito and Fu finished their explanation, Naruto lifted his head to stare right into Sasuke's Sharingan eyes. Sasuke himself was starting to doubt himself when he looked into Naruto's eyes. His half-lidded eyes were dead-looking, as if there was no life left in them. His face didn't show any expression, just as blank as a fresh canvas. His hair caused shadows to appear over his eyes, making his posture even more deathly. Inwardly shivering, Sasuke drew his tanto in his right hand and stood in his kenjutsu stance. The two stared at each other, one with a deathly gaze and one with a slightly nervous but arrogant gaze. Seeing that the two ready, Anko started the match. 11th match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Sasuke Uchiha. Begin. As if 1Q Sasuke weaved through numerous hand seals, whilst Naruto just stood there, not reacting at all to the danger being presented. After Sasuke had finished making hand seals, he brought his left hand to his mouth and took a deep breath. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu, he called out as he released a large fireball, twice his height, at the rooted Uzukage. When the fireball connected, it exploded and scorched the earth around it. Many people started to cheer, thinking that Naruto had been caught in the flames, to which Sasuke forgot about his initial fear, smirked smugly and turned off his Sharingan. After a few seconds he didn't hear Anko call him the winner and the cheers from before had died down. Upon closer inspection he saw that they were ones of shock and they were intentionally looking behind him. What are they so shocked about? He thought as he rose an eyebrow in confusion and turned around to see what they staring at. Only to find himself looking down the barrel of Naruto's M9. Bang. Ah! Sasuke shouted as he dropped his tanto so that he could cover his left eye, which now had a hole in it and was bleeding profusely. In reality that would have blown a hole through his skull, but because of his instincts Sasuke was able to make the bullet go diagonally through his eye and out the side of his head before it hit anything else important. As soon as he fell to the ground, Naruto pressed the M9 against his forehead with that same dead look about him, as if it didn't matter to him that he had just blew a person's eye out. Naruto pulled the hammer back, ready to fire another round directly into his brain, and was in the process of squeezing the trigger but paused when he heard Anko shout out to him. Naruto-kun, stop. You won all right. No need to go any further. Anko yelled as Naruto registered what she said and stopped within seconds of killing the Uchiha. Sasuke opened his only working eye to see Naruto's expression come back to reality, though he still had a cold expression on. Naruto relaxed his grip from pulling the trigger and pulled the hammer back into place, before putting it back into its holster and walking off towards the changing rooms. Asshole! He muttered as he passed the Uchiha without even looking at him as the medic Nin came and tried to heal his eye. He then looked at Anko and gave her a small smile to reassure her that he was fine. I'll pick you up after the negotiations for our date, Anko-chan, he said cheerfully as Anko nodded back with a grin as she decided to finish the tournament. Winner of the tournament, Naruto Uzumaki. Many of the foreigners cheered loudly, including the captains and privates, whilst the Konoha residents kept quiet as they were inwardly fuming that the demon won. The Kages themselves were shocked, though Onoki was more like sweating as he knew what that meant. Uzushiogakure was now under the UWN's control and not theirs, all because of his stubbornness. As Naruto walked into the changing rooms, he absently thought of what the negotiations would be like. Most likely a pain in the, he thought as took off his helmet and started changing. If only he knew how right he was. Naruto stared at the ceiling to his hotel room, clad in his armor and white and orange trench coat. He looked like he was paying attention to the detail of the room when he was actually in deep thought about the talks. Specifically about the Tsuchikage. The man had no respect for anybody who was younger than himself, and it had been for this reason that there had been no mention of a Yondaime Tsuchikage at all. His reputation of being Ryotenbun no Onoki meant that he was quick to switch sides from one another, and that made him a very dangerous man when picking as an ally, especially when it came to trusting him. He'll definitely try and gain something out of me, that's guaranteed. Naruto thought grimly with a frown. Kid, I don't like this just as much as you, but I wouldn't worry much about that senile old man. Remember, you won that bet fair and square. The Kages cannot afford to lose the UWN, and so should give you Uzushiogakure as promised. Though it was already yours by birth. Kurama mentally added, trying reassure his partner so that he would stop worrying over things too much. By focusing too much on one thing, he would become oblivious to everything else, something that a leader mustn't fall into. I know, I know, but still I can't help but feel a headache coming on soon. Naruto mentally replied to his tenant as he stood up and stretched his muscles, causing his joints to pop into place. He yawned as he walked over to his equipment laying nearby. Picking up his sidearms, which were in his holsters, he tied them around his hips securely to stop them from falling down. Next he placed his Colt M4A1 Sopmod on his back by the strap, his stun knife was on his lower back from his fights with Konoha 11, and his sword was attached to his left hip. Placing his right index and middle fingers to his right ear, Naruto activated his codec to get in contact with his wives and captains. Uzukage-sama, was the simultaneous replies from his generals and captains. Everyone meet me in front of the hotel at 1100 hours. That will be when we will go to our meeting with the cages, Naruto ordered as he heard numerous confirmations through his codec. When everyone had confirmed his orders, he took his fingers away from his codec and glanced at the clock opposite the bed. 9:30 a.m., it showed, meaning he had an hour and a half until he met up with the others of his group. I could use some breakfast, he thought absently as a particular ramen stand came to mind. Over the course of his banishment he had learned to not constantly eat the stuff, but he could have it as a treat since he was eating more healthily. So whilst he would eat normal food just as much as everyone else, he still loved to have ramen from time to time, and that time was now. Plus he would be able to tell Tyuki and Ayame about his offer to move to the UWN in person, as it seemed more polite than sending a message. Shutting and locking the door to his room, he made his way towards Ichiraku ramen stand. Konoha streets. It would appear that nothing has changed since my banishment, Naruto thought as he knew the villagers were either glaring at him or whispering insults, thinking he couldn't hear them. Ka-chan, what's that armor that guy is wearing? Never you mind Toshiro-kun. Just stay away from him, he'll only lead you to your death. Oh okay Ka-chan. Naruto sighed as he heard the small conversation between the mother and her son. Truth be told, he wanted nothing more than to go there, chew out the mother and tell the kid otherwise, but a couple of things stopped him. Firstly, he couldn't afford to cause any trouble at the moment, and secondly, despite his feelings, he didn't want to cause a rift between the mother and her son, especially since he mentally saw himself and Kushina in their places. Though he was pretty sure his Ka-chan wouldn't have been as cruel as this woman was if she was warning him about someone. Soon he saw the familiar stand that he had visited in his childhood and had a small flashback of the first time he came here with the Sandaime when he was about 6 years old. Pushing the flaps to allow him entry, he saw that the stand was mostly empty except for Tyuki, who had his back to him as he tended to the food. He took a seat on one of the stools and looked to see that the stand hadn't changed at all since his banishment. What'll you have? Tyuki said in a bored toned voice, with his back still facing him. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the unusual behavior. As far as he knew, Tyuki always greeted his customers with a cheery attitude, but now that he thinks about it, Tyuki and his daughter could very well have been affected badly by his banishment, so it wasn't completely a surprise that Tyuki wasn't very friendly. One miso ramen please, Naruto asked. Tyuki froze for a moment before as he recognized that voice. Ever so slowly he turned around slowly to see Naruto sitting there with his arms crossed and with a smirk plastered on as he watched Tyuki in amusement. Naruto? Tyuki stuttered as the blonde's smirk widened slightly. Hey old man, how ya been? Naruto asked as the man looked close to tears. Tyuki was indeed close to crying in joy at seeing his favorite customer. When the man and his daughter heard the news that Naruto was being banished, they immediately tried to visit him, but as they arrived at the prison they saw some of Naruto's comrades leaving writhed smiles or smirks that didn't please the pair. They were denied entrance, and when they asked for an explanation they were told that only shinobi could visit shinobi criminals. They knew the man was lying, but they couldn't force their way through, and they couldn't ask the Hokage as his banishment was scheduled for the same day. The time it would have taken to gain entrance would be too long from the constant blocks the civilians would try to put up. In the end, all they could do was watch in sadness as Naruto ran as fast as he could away from them until he was no longer visible to them, having ran too far for them to see them. Almost as soon as he was no longer visible, the villagers started to celebrate, glad that he was gone. From then on, both Tsuki and Ayame were cold to anyone who badmouthed Naruto. There was even a case where someone insulted Naruto's parents, which resulted in Ayame discreetly putting laxatives in the person's food. The Konoha 11 were also treated coldly, even those who had nothing to do with Naruto's banishment. The reason being that even though they didn't treat him horribly while he was in prison, they did constantly get on his case for even the minor of things when he was with them in both the academy and when they were made genin. Naruto, my boy, how are you here though? I thought you weren't allowed back in Konoha. Not that I mind or anything. Tsuki quickly added at the end in the hopes of not insulting the man. Naruto waved off the accidental insult. It was a legitimate question since he didn't know of his current status. No worries, old man. The reason I'm here is because the Shinobi Alliance can't handle one village and one criminal organization, so they decided to try and get my nation involved so that they survive this war that Akatsuki started. Naruto explained with extra emphasis on the "my" in his response. Tsuki was stunned to say the least. He knew that the Shinobi Alliance was losing the war and that they were in meetings with United Whirlpool Nation's leader, but the emphasis on the "my" made it sound like, "You're the Uzukage, aren't you?" The nod in response confirmed it, as the two shared stories and Naruto had his ramen. Naruto told Tsuki about how he untied the West to form the United Whirlpool Nation, and Tsuki filled Naruto in on how his life was during Naruto's banishment. After an hour had passed, the two finally stopped and Naruto thought it best he give Tsuki his offer before he left to meet with the rest of his group outside the hotel. "Say, old man, I was wondering if you considered moving to somewhere else." Tsuki scratched his chin in thought as he mulled the idea over. If he was honest with himself, he did think about moving ever since Naruto was banished, but had decided against it because of the dangers of bandits, possibly ninja, and the trouble of setting up shop at their new location. "I have considered it, but there would have been dangerous people out there that we could run into, as well as the problems we would face of getting started in selling that made it impossible for us to move," he replied. "Well then, how about this? I will take care of everything that you would need to move to the UWN, and in return you give me a discount from time to time," Naruto offered as Tsuki thought the offer over. After a couple of seconds, Tsuki gave Naruto his reply. "Okay Naruto, you got yourself a deal, and I will tell Ayame of this when she comes back from picking up some supplies. That reminds me, she really missed you as well, and I'm pretty sure that she would love to see you again after so long," Tsuki said as Naruto nodded in return. "All right, I talk to her later on as my group and I will be going back to our headquarters after our meeting with the Cages. Before then, pack all of the essentials that you need and head to the Hokage Monument, where I will meet up with you there. After that we will send you to the UWN, where for the time being you will be living as guests at my home, then we will set you up with the resources you will need. I am pretty sure that business will be fruitful, considering you were some of the only people to treat me with kindness when I was in Konoha," Naruto informed the chef. He was glad that the man was coming back with him to the UWN. It was also easier that they were civilians, since the Cages could not interfere with civilian affairs and the civilians could not hold them in Konoha unless they were being charged with a crime with valid evidence. It would seem that the civilians' efforts to be in control of Konoha by stating that civilians were under their complete control were actually working in his favor now. It was then that he noticed that it had been hours since Ayame had gone to get supplies for the ramen stand. What could be taking her so long? She wasn't the kind of person to allow anything to interrupt her when she was working. So that meant either she was having trouble with getting the supplies before she could leave. Or someone has stopped her mid-journey. Taking the necessary Ryo out to pay for the meal, he lay the money on table before addressing Tsuki. "I'll see you later, old man, and remember, only essentials. We can only take so much before it becomes a danger," Naruto reminded Tsuki as the man nodded and waved him goodbye, to which he responded in turn with a smile. The Huis did have a maximum weight load, and carrying 2 extra people and their luggage may weigh the helicopters too much. However, as soon as he had gone past the flaps, his expression turned cold as ran off towards the route that Ayame took when picking up supplies, hoping his fear was wrong. Minutes later, "Ah!" Ayame shouted as she was forced to sit down against the wall in an alleyway, her work clothes ripped to the point that it barely covered her body. She had numerous bruises, cuts and scratches inflicted on her from her attackers, who towered above her with looks of unrestrained lust. There were 3 of them altogether. They were all civilians, and despite that, Ayame was still outnumbered, and as she wasn't a ninja, she couldn't fight them. It was then that the leader of them took a step towards her as the others held her down. "Relax, you'll love this, demon whore," the leader said as he pulled his pants and underwear off. "No," Ayame begged through her split lip, as the leader ripped her panties away. She started to hyperventilate and started to slowly lose conscious. All of her time alive she had wished that Naruto would be the one to take her virginity, not some civilian pigs. "Shut up, bitch," the leader growled as he was about to penetrate the bound girl. Bang. Gah. The leader yelled as he fell down on his back, clutching his crotch as blood flowed out at the speed of a waterfall. When the other thugs saw what had happened to their leader, they turned towards where they heard the sound come from and saw Naruto there, his killer mode on and his 5-7 in his outstretched right hand, which was smoking slightly from the discharge of the bullet. "It's the demon. Run," one of the other thugs shouted as he and the other uninjured thug ran down the alleyway, away from Naruto as fast as they could in an effort to get away. Bang 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 bang. Both thugs fell to ground holding onto both of their kneecaps as the bullets shattered them from behind them, rendering them permanently crippled and in a lot of pain. Upon impact they all shouted in pain again, though Naruto ignored them and walked towards the barely conscious Ayame, turning his killer mode off in the process. When Ayame saw Naruto coming towards her, she firstly thought it was another rapist and started to tremble, however when she recognized him she let out a small smile. "Naruto," Ayame whispered in relief as her eyes rolled up and fainted. Sighing, Naruto took off his trench coat, crouched down and wrapped it around Ayame's form. When Ayame felt the coat around her, she instinctively pulled it tighter to her to keep her warm. Once she was comfortable, Naruto stood up straight and activated his codec. Calling all call signs, change of plans. "Captain Kyoto, take 2 guards and rendezvous with me at the hospital. Prepare for medical condition number 0198721. 3 of the bodyguards will arrest the 3 wounded civilians at these coordinates, punches in his location, and take them to the Hokage's tower. All other captains and generals are to take the rest of the guards and proceed to the Hokage's tower as well, where Generals Yugito and Fu are to then call a meeting along with the other cages. Everyone else will continue with their previous orders." "Confirm, sir." "Yes, sir," was the response. Taking his fingers off the communicative device, Naruto walked back to Ayame and picked her up bridal style. Looking over the thugs, he saw that they weren't going to be going anywhere, so decided not to restrain them as his soldiers should be arriving soon. Then he disappeared, leaving an after image as he made his way to Konoha's hospital. Konoha's hospital. Minutes later. "We're here to look for Uzukage-sama. He told us that he brought a patient here for us to treat," Inoue said as she and her 2 bodyguards addressed the receptionist with blank expressions. The receptionist glared at them with hatred as she spoke back in barely contained venom. "The demon and the demon-loving whore are in room 201. Now get the hell a move on so that I can deal with normal human patient requests," she sneered. If Inoue was offended, she didn't show it. Instead, she nodded back with a neutral expression to the receptionist and walked past her and made her way to the designated room, leaving the receptionist to wonder why they didn't retaliate to her insults. After walking for a few minutes, the group eventually made it to room 201 and proceeded to open the slide door. When she opened it, she saw Naruto standing at the end of the bed staring at the unconscious Ayame, who lay in the hospital bed. She was dressed in a hospital gown and was covered up to the neck by the bedsheets. "Uzukage-sama, is this the patient?" Inoue saluted her commanding officer along with her bodyguards following her. Naruto didn't even turn to look at the trio as he responded in a kind of trance-like tone. At ease, and yes, this is the patient. At roughly 10:30 hours, Ayame Ichiraku here was nearly raped by 3 civilians in an alleyway where they also inflicted wounds on her for resisting. She has received numerous cuts, scratches, bruises, and she is dehydrated from crying in the heat. They never got to actually do the deed, but I didn't want to take any chances. She also fainted at the end of the ordeal. Please do what you can for her and do not let anyone aside from our group, Tsunade or her father, into this room. Anybody who tries to force their way is considered an enemy and you have the right to use lethal force. Understood. Yes, Uzukage-sama. Inoue replied with conviction as Naruto nodded and vanished, with an after-image being left for a few seconds before vanishing also. She knew that Naruto cared about the girl as he had mentioned her a few times as he told them about his past in Konoha when he met them, and that now he was barely containing his rage as he left. After she was sure that Naruto had left, she turned towards her 2 bodyguards. You 2 guard the door, she ordered. Yes, Captain Kyoto. They replied simultaneously as they walked outside the door to keep a lookout to make sure that nobody interrupted her unless it was urgent or if any of the previously mentioned people turned up and wanted to see the girl. Once they were gone, Inoue then turned back to look at the unconscious Ayame. All right, let's see what we can do here, she said rhetorically as she took out her medic kit and started to tend to the girl's afflictions. Hokage Tower. Council Chamber. The room was darkened with no windows and lights were used for lighting. In the center of the room was a large circle table that was able to accommodate the Kages, Naruto's group, and the council. That demon should be executed, one civilian council member shouted, with the others shouting in agreement. The shinobi council members all shook their heads in annoyance as they heard that demand for the who knows how long time. Along with them were the Kages, who were talking amongst themselves, and Naruto's group were doing the same as the Kages. A moment later they saw Naruto appear, scaring the shit out of both councils and the Kages. Uzukage Dono, are we ready to start the negotiations? Tsunade asked, hoping to get them to begin talking. Nope, was Naruto's unexpected answer. In response, he was on the end of numerous outbursts from the civilians, shinobi, and some of the Kages. Why not? Demanded as he was about to use his Raiden no Yoroi on him. Seeing this, Naruto put his right hand up to signal for silence. A moment later everyone was quiet and were now listening intently to him for an explanation. What I mean is that there is one more thing that is needed to be discussed before we start the negotiations. This is because as I was making my way here after stopping for some breakfast, I came across the sight of one Ayame Ichiraku about to be raped by 3 Konoha civilians. In response, I incapacitated them and brought Miss Ichiraku to the hospital where she is now being treated by Captain Kyoto. Naruto ground out as the civilians were in uproar. Lies. Our Konoha villagers would never do such a thing, though her being associated with you is a good enough reason to do so. Another civilian member shouted with nods of agreement from the other members. Oh really? Then how do you explain this? Naruto questioned as he activated the hologram projector that was hidden in his helmet. A small light shone from the helmet and showed the scene of the attempted rape to the audience against the bare wall. The Kages, Naruto's group, and the Shinobi Council members were disgusted at seeing the attempted rape, although the Kages and Shinobi were also taking note of Naruto's hologram projector. When Naruto came and dealt with the culprits, they winced slightly as they knew how much pain they were in. The civilians though were furious and were demanding that Naruto be punished for using excessive force or saying the proof wasn't good enough. Oh, I thought the punishment for rape was execution. And how can you sit there, see that crime as if you were there and then say no crime was committed? Naruto rebuked as the civilians went quiet for the moment. Tsunade, seeing this, stood up as it was her responsibility to give out punishments. Well, seeing as it is clear that those 3 civilians are guilty, they will be imprisoned for life and given a session with Ibiki. Normally they would be executed, but due to the fact that the deed wasn't actually done, I can't do that, so this is what they get instead. Tsunade said the civilians were yelling again in protest, saying that they shouldn't be punished at all. Quiet! Tsunade shouted, using Ki to shut them up. It was then the doors burst open and in flew the three mentioned civilians as they were thrown through the doors by three of Naruto's group bodyguards, hands cuffed behind their backs. As the three attempted to sit up, their arresters used the stock of their Colt M16A2 rifles to hit them in the back of the neck, causing them to fall flat on their stomachs. Prisoners escorted to location, sir. One of the soldiers reported as he and the two others saluted their commanding officer. At ease and thank you. Now continue with your original duty of defending the captains, Naruto said as they responded with a confirmation before marching to stand by the captains and other generals. Naruto then turned back to Tsunade and addressed her. Hokage Dono, personally I do not like your decision, but they fall under your jurisdiction, so I have no choice but to hand them over to you, he said with a slight frown since he was upset about the punishment. Tsunade summoned a few Anbu to take them to Ibiki, the criminals shouting in protest as they were roughly dragged out of the room and causing more pain in the areas from where they were shot. After they were gone, Tsunade thought it best that the negotiations began. Okay, if there are no more problems, can we begin these talks? Nodding back to her, Naruto strode over to his group and took a seat next to his wives. When it looked like everyone was ready, Mifune decided to begin. Okay, now that we are all here, this second meeting between the Shinobi Alliance and the United Whirlpool Nation. As before, I will act as mediator. You may begin, Mifune said as he took his seat again. First of all, I would like everyone here to hold up their side of the bargain and that Uzukage is now under the permanent jurisdiction of the United Whirlpool Nation. Naruto began as many of those present hoped he had forgotten about that. The nation was rich in resources that made Hai no Kuni a very rich country, and the land was very good for strategic maneuverings. To give it away would be a very hard blow to the Shinobi Alliance, especially Konoha. Knowing that they had no right to retain Uzukage as their own, Tsunade made the announcement. Very well, Uzukage and all of its resources are hereby under the ownership of the U. I say no, Onoki interrupted Tsunade as many of the occupants of the room stared in shock at what the Tsuchikage was doing. Excuse me, Naruto said in a low tone as his eyes narrowed. You heard me. I will not give up a strategic point to some young idiot who leads a nation whose inhabitants cannot even use chakra, Onoki declared as everyone fell silent. The room had become so quiet that if a pin dropped it would be as loud as a kunai hitting the ground. Comma. Is that so, you senile old shit stain? Everyone, minus Naruto's group, mouths open in shock as they heard the insult pass through Naruto's lips with his hair covering his eyes. Sure, in the past cages would indirectly insult each other, but never did they actually openly say it. The effect was shown as the Tsuchikage turned red from anger and flew up so that he was average height. He then glared at the Uzukage with as much hate as he could. How dare you say such things, you ungrate! Click. The Tsuchikage's eyes widened in fright as he was now looking down the barrel of one of Naruto's 5.7s. Naruto's expression showed a scowl in place, directed at the man who was at the end of his firearm. Naruto was indeed angry. This man was about to back out of a deal that had already been made. Are you sure? If so, then I will happily give you another arsehole with the help of my pistol here, through that skull of yours. Then if the others don't comply with the conditions of our bet, I will declare war on the Shinobi Alliance, and I am pretty sure that you don't need us as your enemy, especially since the reason you wanted an alliance with us in the first place was because you were already losing a war. Naruto growled as he applied pressure to Onoki's forehead with his 5.7. The other cages and ninja were about to intervene but stopped when they heard more clicking noises, this time coming from Naruto's group. Turning to look at them, they saw that each of the bodyguards had their Colt M16A2 rifles locked on them, the captains had their Beretta M9 sidearms aimed at them, and Yugito and Fu had their Colt M14A1 Sopmod rifles also trained in on each one of them as well. For a second everyone was as still as statues, neither one wanting to throw the first blow. The tension in the room was thick as many of the shinobi and civilian side were sweating slightly, anxious about the possible battle that could occur. Each cage knew that despite their speed, only the Raikage would have a chance, and that was if he could use his Raiden no Yoroi in time before a bullet hit him first. Uzukage Dono, please, there's no need to go to such extreme measures, we will give you Uzushiogakure, we give you our word, Tsunade managed to say, hoping to avoid a bloodbath. For another minute everyone was still until eventually Naruto spoke. Very well then, from now on Uzushiogakure is under the control of the UWN. Any further refusal similar to Tsuchikage Dono's will be treated as a threat and will be eliminated. Now then, let's get back to the issue at hand here, Naruto said as he holstered his weapon, along with everyone else, and retook his seat. The cages and other shinobi present let out a sigh of relief, which turned into a glare towards Onoki for almost causing the UWN to become an enemy. This was something they really, and emphasis on the really, didn't need right now. Once everyone was seated again, they heard a ringing sound coming from Naruto's helmet. Then they saw Naruto raise his right index and middle finger to his right ear and began to talk. Report. Authorization to engage Akatsuki member Deidara granted, Naruto said as the other occupants of the room jumped slightly at the order. Are you sure that was a wise idea, Uzukage-sama? Members of the Akatsuki are S rank each and would even give us cages a run for our money. How can your men, who can't even use chakra, defeat such an opponent? Mei questioned. Didn't Naruto just defeat some of Konoha's top ninja with only the basic equipment we give to our troops? Naruto's group thought. Although they said it mentally, Naruto coincidentally repeated it out loud. Uzukage Dono, yesterday I defeated the Konoha 11 with only standard military equipment and nothing else. What do you think my men can do when they have access to better equipment and have numbers on their side, especially since my soldiers have a sense of teamwork and comradeship that dwarfs Konoha's by miles? What do you think their odds really are? Naruto rhetorically said as the cages and council still did not look convinced, although Gaara looked like he was attempting to see the possibilities rather than blindly say no. Seeing that almost none of them were convinced, Naruto sighed and gave a bored look before reaching up to his hologram projector again. Watch and learn. CV-67, codenamed Baseplate. Orders from Uzukage-sama. Permission to engage the enemy cleared. One of the sailors from the radio station informed the other occupants of the ship via radio communications. All right. Sergeant Ito Akita replied as he ran a hand through his snow-white hair. He stood at roughly 6 feet, had blue eyes and had a scar that run down from his left eyebrow to his left cheek. His duty was to command the ships and other vehicles in the absence of his captain, Sakamoto Kumamoto. Right now he was positioned next to the helmsman overlooking the ship from the bridge. His eyes had hardened when he got news of the Akatsuki member closing in from the long-range radar they used. Taking the pair of binoculars that were strung around his neck, he gazed over the water. Soon he spotted the Deidara on a bird made of clay flying towards Baseplate at rather fast speeds with a maniacal smile on his face and hands. Upon seeing the enemy, he dropped the binoculars to hang by the strings and picked up the intercom microphone. Man the Sea Sparrow anti-aircraft missile launchers, the enemy is approaching from the northeast and from a distance of 2 kilometers. Javelin launchers will be in support, and I want Remington M700 snipers to target the Akatsuki member himself. The others will try to keep his explosives away from the ship. He blared out as the alarm sounded and the men started to run to their posts. Time to send these Urs to the lowest depths of the sea. Deidara chuckled as he closed in on the aircraft carrier. For the moment he had met no resistance, but he had noticed that they were aware of him coming towards them, judging from the increase in activity and the sirens blaring. When he was close enough, he placed his hands into the bags that contained his explosive clay and had the mouths on his hands eat the clay. When he brought them back up, he opened his palms to see the mouths chewing on the clay still. The mouths then spat out the clay to reveal small clay birds. He grinned at them as he threw them on both sides of him. She won. He grinned as they then expanded until they were as big as the one he was standing on. The two birds then sped ahead of him, intent on causing damage to the huge metal ship. Comma, 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 comma. Fire barrage 1. Deidara looked in shock as the sea sparrows launched a barrage of missiles, locked onto the two speeding birds. In a matter of seconds the missiles made contact, causing his clay birds to explode. This is going to be harder than I thought, Deidara inwardly said as he gathered more clay into his hands. This time creating 4 birds and did the same as before. Fire barrage 2. Deidara predicted the missiles this time and guided all of his clay birds away from the missiles. He laughed when he saw them miss, but his eyes widened when he saw them following him. Shit, he cursed as he was forced to use evasive moves to fly around until eventually his clay birds were hit and exploded with smoke covering the area of impact. This led the terrorist bomber to go on the defensive. He would dodge left or right, avoiding the missiles at all cost. Then he flew across the deck hoping that he was too close for them to do anything. Bang. Gah! He yelled out as a bullet hit him square in the chest, the force of the impact causing him to fall and hit the deck with a thud, landing near the edge of the deck. When he sat upright he had to rub his eyes as his vision was blurry. Once his vision was clear he saw that he was surrounded by sailors. Image-wise look on Google Images and type, as Navy sailor, and that they all had their Colt M16A2 rifles pointing at him. Target grounded and surrounded, sir. The sniper reported as he pulled the bolt back to his Remington, ejecting the empty cartridge onto the floor. He was at the front of the group soldiers, paying close attention to the terrorist bomber's actions. Deidara observed his surroundings, noting the soldiers that were paying close attention to him. Overall I seem to be in some pretty deep shit now. I can only hope this works, he thought as he placed his hands into his bags of clay to perform his Kibaku Jirai. Bang bang. Only to be shot in both of his arms, making them useless to him. He growled at them as they slowly moved towards him, in the hopes of subduing him and interrogating him for information. Guess I have no choice, Deidara grinned, causing the soldiers to pause, wondering what he was going to do next. The man then opened the mouth located on his chest. Seals then started to spread over his body and he began to become transparent. He laughed crazily at the thought of the destruction he would cause by using the suicide technique. Artisan explosion. Bang. Deidara wasn't given the chance to finish the jutsu as a bullet was now planted in his head, courtesy of the Remington sniper. Target killed, Sergeant, he said into his radio. Roger that, take the body to the morgue for observation. Ito replied as the soldiers confirmed their orders, before taking Deidara's body away. Konoha. After the commotion on the ship finished the hologram projector was turned off. When this was done everyone, minus Naruto's group, were stupefied at the display of power. Looking around Naruto saw the expressions of the cages and heard Kurama laugh in his mind. Shaking his head mentally at the kitsune he turned his attention back to the shocked cages. As you can see, despite my nation's inability to use chakra we can still hold our own against both Otogakure and the Akatsuki. Now can we move on with these talks? Naruto irritably said as the cages woke up from their shock and continued on with the talks. 3 hours later, after constantly debating between both sides they eventually came to an agreement, though not everyone was happy about it. The UWN will ally with Shinobi Alliance against Otogakure and the Akatsuki. To help prevent the loss of life the UWN will provide medical assistance, under strict guidelines, and the Shinobi Alliance will do the same with the UWN. Other than that the UWN will only take orders from their own forces, unless authorized by their captains or generals. There will be no trespassing from either side and only the leaders of either side will be allowed in each other's territory. This is the pact agreed upon and so I conclude this meeting. Mifune stated as he looked around to everyone, though some reluctantly, nod their heads. The ninja were in full agreement. The civilians were less than pleased because of their lack of gain, and Danzo and the elders were fuming at the result. They were about to object but were beaten to by a certain blonde Uzukage. Before we all retire, I have two more issues that need to be addressed, or to be more specific, issues concerning Konoha, Naruto said, getting the attention of everyone in the room. And what would those be, Uzukage Dono? Tsunade asked, hoping it wasn't something big. Her hopes went unanswered: the crime committed by one Danzo Shimura and the retirement of the Uzumaki clan symbol from Konoha. This caused both the shinobi and the civilian side of the council to start denying, for different reasons. The civilians because Danzo bribed them to support him, and the shinobi because of their attachment to the symbol. You can't do that. We have full rights to use that symbol. It's been with Konoha since its founding. To remove it would be to remove a piece of ourselves. Sume Inuzuka, Kiba's mother, pleaded. This was the thought that had been shared with the other Konoha shinobi. It was a very important part of their history, and many people saw it as a symbol of strength. The other Kages, seeing that this was only related to Konoha, decided it was best to leave. Naruto saw this but didn't stop them, as he saw no reason to keep them here. Looking back to the Inuzuka, he frowned. I can and I will. Mito Uzumaki made Konoha promise one thing: to raise a Jinchuriki with love. This was so that whenever they had to face the Kyuubi, their love would overrule the Kyuubi's hate. You failed in that request. When my mother came to Konoha in the hopes of gaining allies so that she could claim her homeland back, you refused and abandoned the Uzumaki to save yourselves. When I was in Konoha, I was beaten by Konoha civilians and shinobi alike on my birthdays. My blood was spilt on a symbol by people who adore it yet spit on the clan who owns it. Konoha's academy doesn't even mention that the symbol they wear with pride is owned by the clan they betrayed, and instead proclaims it as their own. The Uzumaki clan account was completely drained after the Kyuubi's attack, to be used as either repairs or compensation when there was clearly an Uzumaki, namely me, alive and had full rights to the account. I myself was ridiculed, and many people, both civilian and shinobi alike, have said how worthless my clan was. Now you say that I have no right to the symbol. Who the hell are you to say that, you kami damned hypocrites? Naruto finished yelling as the shinobi in the room could only look down in shame at the harsh truth. Calming himself down, Naruto then glared at the council with hatred. I expect the symbol to be removed within the next week. Anybody who is caught by my men wearing that symbol without my permission will be arrested and will face a court-martial. The Konoha residents raise an eyebrow, or trial. Naruto deadpanned as the shinobi nodded in silence, though the civilians didn't react at all since they never saw any real value in the symbol. Very well, Uzukage Dono. Now can we move on to the case of Danzo's crime? Tsunade said glumly. Yes, I too would like to know what I have done wrong, said Man asked. Throughout the whole meeting he had said nothing, as he was planning on using his Nei Shinobi to steal the UWN's secrets. Naruto pulled out a book that read, Konoha Law Book. The book contained every single law that was still in effect today. It was maroon leathered hardback, and the title was written in golden letters. The size of the book was the same as Jiraiya's Ika books. I read this over a few times and noticed something that was still in effect. Clears his throat. When a shinobi is exiled, banished, she will be given a seal that will temporarily seal away her ability to use hand seals unless released by the Hokage. From here, Danzo has broken this law, as he didn't apply a seal that would temporarily seal my ability to use hand seals, but permanently. Therefore he will be punished. Naruto recited as Tsunade clenched her hands into fists and grit her teeth in anger. Danzo, you're under arrest and will face trial for breaking the law, Tsunade ordered as two Anbu appeared behind the man to arrest him. However, as they touched him, he disappeared in a poof of smoke, signifying that he was just a clone. Damn that fool. Anbu, alert all Chunin and Jonin shinobi that Danzo Shimura is to be arrested for using an unauthorized seal. He is to be captured alive, and also inform the genin of his status, but they are ordered to only look out for him. If they do spot him, they are to inform either a Chunin, Jonin or Anbu of his location. Dismissed. Tsunade ordered as the Anbu rushed to try and apprehend the elder. During all of this, Naruto was looking rather down, as this would mean more fighting for his men, since now they would also be facing not just Akatsuki and Otogakure, but also Danzo and his Nei organization. To sum it up, he had to face 3 enemies now, 4 if you include the Shinobi Alliance as a potential enemy. Once the atmosphere had calmed down once again, Naruto stood up to conclude the meeting. Now that that has been solved, I would like to give some warnings about our agreement. The medics and doctors who will help you with using our medicine will be in charge of any patient that requires their medication. This is because without the help of chakra we cannot afford to make mistakes. Too much of certain medication will kill the patient or make them even more sick, and too little will only achieve in suppressing the ailment, not cure it. Also, any misuse of our medical equipment will be in breach of our pact, and in turn it will be void. In addition, my medics and doctors have taken an oath that they will help anybody who is in need of help, be it ally or enemy, so if you see my medical forces healing an enemy ninja, do not try to intervene. Doing so will also be breaking our pact. Finally, be aware that anyone who trespasses on the UWN's territory will be under our jurisdiction, not the Shinobi Alliance. Repeat this to the others and make sure they understand that they are on very thin ice. They slip up even once and we will no longer be allies, and all that we have contributed to the war will be taken back, Naruto said with finality as he and his group saluted everyone present before marching out of the room through the double doors, leaving a stone council and cage behind. Well, this is going to be troublesome. Shikamaru yawned out. Too right, friend. It'll be hard enough to convince everyone to take off the symbol, add in the other requirements, and it sure isn't going to be pretty, Choji Akamichi said in response to his close friend. Yeah, I sure will get an earful out of my clan, especially Ino. I love my daughter very much, but she does yell a lot when things don't go her way. I can't help but think that maybe I shouldn't have treated her like a princess and instead taught her some humility at the time. Sure, she has matured a lot since her academy and genin days, but she still has the tendency revert back to them when in the company of family, Inoichi Yamanaka added as he massaged his temples when he imagined the commotion he was going to get at home. Ino would have been present as the clan head, but after training herself to exhaustion to suppress the guilt that swelled up after seeing Naruto, took a toll on her, and she was currently in the hospital recovering. Many of the other clan heads were nodding in agreement, though the civilians and elders were still plotting ways to gain something out of the agreement. I need to speak with Naruto at some point. If only so that I can try and make it up to him. Tsunade thought as she dismissed the council, stood up and walked out of the room towards her office to finish her paperwork and get drunk with alcohol. Meanwhile, with Naruto, hey there, stud. A pair of arms wrapped around Naruto's waist from behind as Anko leaned into his back and placed her mouth near his left ear. Anko-chan. Naruto replied as he gave her a grin in return. Before any of them could continue, they heard some clicking noises coming from the group behind them. Turning to look at them, they saw each of the bodyguards aiming their rifles at Anko, whilst the others were tense and had their hands on their weapons, ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. Smiling, Naruto waved them off, telling them that it was okay. It's all right, men. She's an ally here, he said as the group relaxed, but Yugito and Fu were still glaring the duo, silently saying, explain. Upon seeing those looks, Naruto mentally sweated, and he could swear he heard Kurama laughing in the back of his mind. Taking Anko off of him, he saw his 2 wives walk up to him before stopping in front of him, arms crossed. Naruto-kun, is there something you want to tell us? Fu asked with sarcasm intoned in her voice. Well, you see why, Yugito-chan, F. Fu-chan. Yes, Naruto-kun, Yugito added as she tapped her foot in irritation. Naruto gulped as he realized he couldn't screw up now. You see, I was wondering if it would be okay to date Anko here with your permission, Naruto quickly said, closing his eyes and making a pained expression in preparation for the incoming feminine fury. When he didn't feel anything, he opened his eyes to see the odd sight of both of his wives whispering to each other. Their expressions were hard to denote, so he just stood there, waiting for the decision of what they were talking about to be made. After a minute or two they stopped communicating and gave a look towards their husband that made him confused as they looked slightly happy. We'll let you date Anko here on the condition that you treat us fairly. This also includes anyone extra you wish to date and we must approve of them. Luckily we don't have any problems with Anko here, so don't worry about her. With others we may outright say no, or we may want to give them a test to see if they're worthy enough, Yugito declared, with Fu nodding to emphasize the point. Oh okay. He was able to stammer out before sighing in relief and turning to Anko. Well, that settles it, Anko-chan. I'll take you out to a restaurant at say 8 p.m., Naruto offered. Anko nodded vigorously before giving him a quick peck on the lips before waving goodbye and heading to her apartment, which she shared with Kurenai. See you then, stud. After the woman had got some distance, Naruto heard some whiplash sounds being made from behind him. Turning, he saw his captain snickering, his wives with smirks, and their bodyguards' postures were shaking, trying to rein in their laughter. Come on. He huffed and carried on walking to the hospital to check on Ayame. The snickering of his soldiers and the giggling of his wives following close behind him. Time skip. Konoha Hospital reception. As the group entered the hospital, Naruto saw Inoue arguing with the head doctor. He, along with the others, raised an eyebrow in confusion. What's going on, kid? Something is telling me this isn't going to end well. That seems to be happening all right, Naruto thought as he continued to watch one of his captains argue with the head doctor. You know, kid, I have been wondering why that Senju isn't in charge of the hospital. Given it's her speciality, Kurama asked his host. It's because she's the Hokage. She can give new techniques to the hospital, but she can't have full control over how it's run. This is due to the fact that Tsunade only has control over the shinobi of Konoha, and since this hospital also takes in civilians, the control of the hospital was given to someone the council and Hokage agreed on was best suited. The problem here though is that during the time period between the Sandame's death and the Godaime's inauguration, the council had full control over Konoha. So they appointed someone who didn't like me in an effort to kill me through negligence in my medical care. The shinobi side didn't want this, but couldn't since they were outvoted by both the civilian council and the elders at the time. The person appointed also can't be removed unless 3/4 of the entire government agree, though given how it's only half and half, I'm not surprised nothing has changed, Naruto explained to his tenant. Soon the argument stopped. Inoue sighed in what could only be defeat before conversing in more quiet tones. They eventually finished and the head doctor walked away to what could only be seen as his office. Inoue then spotted them and hurried to report to her superior. Uzukage-sama. She saluted, prompting everyone, minus Naruto and his wives, to salute in return. Report. Physical wounds are minor. Cuts, scratches and bruises. All have been treated and so she is physically fit to leave. However, mentally I can't say the same. She is scared of all men except you and her father. She will recover, but I fear that it will never permanently go away, so in the future I would suggest keeping men from getting too close to her and that you or her father stays close to her. Now normally we would transfer this kind of patient to a recovery room where she can get therapy to help her deal with the event, however apparently here it's a different story. All they treat are physical wounds and injuries. This is why I was arguing with the head doctor. He said that because physically she can leave, that they will discharge her without treating the emotional wounds. I argued no, but he wouldn't have it and gave me an ultimatum: either she leaves within 24 hours or they force her out. Inoue finished grimly as she saw the anger coming from her comrades. No worries, Inoue-san. Contact Hyuki Ichiraku and tell him to come to the hospital. He will help move Ayame to the helicopters where we will arrange for them to move back to the UWN. You may find him at the Huey's now. Naruto ordered as she saluted, took the 2 bodyguards she had with her and walked out of the hospital. All right, let's check on Ayame. Then we'll go back to the hotel. You're all free to do as you wish from there on, Naruto said as he walked towards Ayame's room. The group followed him, each cursing the incompetent hospital staff. When they were close to the girl's room, Naruto raised his right hand, telling his group to stop. A few seconds passed before all three generals tensed, causing the others to tense as well. I've detected 3 people inside Ayame's room that shouldn't be there. Yugito, Fu and I will take care of them. In the meantime, I want everyone else to head back to the Hueys and await further orders. Be prepared for a fight. Sir. Yes, sir. His group replied, turning and leaving the trio alone in the corridor. Let's go. Yugito and Fu nodded, looking just as serious as their husband. The 3 stacked up on either side of the door, Naruto on the left-hand side with Fu next to him and Yugito on the opposite side of the door. All right, we have a civilian hostage inside on the bed. With her are 3 ninjas who should not be there. Yugito-chan will breach the door. I will enter first with Yugito-chan following and then Fu-chan following her. Rules of engagement. Hostage priority. Kill all enemies, but Ayame's protection comes first. Naruto ordered. Yugito and Fu nodded as all 3 pulled out their Colt M4A1 rifles and ed both weapons in preparations. Naruto then raised his right hand and proceeded to count down from 5 by reducing the number of fingers he had raised. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. As soon as he reached 0, Yugito slid the door quickly open, drawing the attention of the shinobi inside the room, each wearing the attire of Otogaker. They were arranged so that one was hovering over the bed with a kunai, one was near the window and the final one was near the door. The room itself, imagine looking through the doorway. The bed is attached to the wall on the right and the window is directly opposite the door. Swinging himself through the door, Naruto fired a shot at the man over the bed, hitting him dead in the head. The force of the impact causing the man to fall backwards to the floor with blood spraying out of his forehead, the man's face in a state of shock. Immediately the one nearest the door lunged at Naruto with kunai in hand as well, whilst the other ninja ran for the window. Before the ninja could strike, he too was shot, but this time in the chest from Yugito as the man fell forward on the ground, blood pooling around his form. The third assailant jumped out of the window and it looked like he was going to make it to the roof opposite. Boom. Until he was blown to pieces from a shot fired from Fu's grenade launcher, causing blood to splash onto the hospital. The commotion made the civilians panic whilst the ninja went to investigate. Oto Nin, why am I not surprised? Naruto asked rhetorically as he scanned Ayame and found nothing wrong with her. He then checked the status of the 2 Oto Nin. The one near the bed was obviously dead unless the man could survive having metal forcibly pushed into his brain. He then heard a groan come from the second man and quickly rushed to him. What are your orders here in Konoha? Tell me now and I will relieve you of the pain. Naruto demanded coldly. We were, sent to kill, all of the weakest, people who, were precious to, you and frame Konoha, Afterwards we were, to meet with 20 others, in the market square at, midnight. Now please, save me. The man said as his vision blurred. Naruto stood up and pointed his rifle at the man's head. His eyes widened and he tried to struggle but froze when he heard Naruto speak. I said I would relieve you of the pain. I didn't say I would save your life. Naruto then pulled the trigger, ending his life knowing he had been tricked. It was then that the cages appeared in room. Looking around they saw the 2 corpses and had noticed the bloodstains on the hospital walls outside. What the hell happened here? Tsunade bellowed as the 3 generals turned their attention to the blonde Hokage. Oto Nin. 3 of them. I killed the one near the bed, Yugito-chan killed the one near the door and Fu-chan killed the one that jumped out the window. Their orders were to kill all those who were weak, but precious to me. Then they would meet up with 20 others in the market square at midnight. Naruto recounted as cages looked at each other in shock that many Oto Nin could so easily get into Konoha. Well, we need to plan. You will not plan anything. Naruto interrupted Tsunade without even looking at her. The reactions this got were mainly the cages looking at Tsunade intently, wondering what her reaction was. What do you mean we won't plan anything? Tsunade demanded, angry at the prospect that they would allow Orochimaru's forces just strut about in her village. I didn't say I wouldn't plan anything, I said you wouldn't. These ninja were under orders to hurt those who are close to me and were too weak to defend themselves. I want to send a message to both Orochimaru and Akatsuki that basically says, with me and you over tenfold. Now you can either sit back and watch or do whatever, but do not under any circumstances interfere. Do so and you will be punished for obstructing an operation, Naruto said with finality as the cages scowled but didn't say anything. Good, now this is what I plan to do. Time skip. 8 p.m. Anko and Kurenai's apartment. Coming. Kurenai shouted as she heard a knock on their door. Opening it, she saw Naruto standing outside in a tuxedo, but instead of the normal bow tie it had a straight black tie. She couldn't help but blush lightly as she took in his form, as the getup was a bit tight, showing an outline of his muscled body. When Naruto saw the blush he grinned before looking in the apartment for Anko. Ahem, I believe that Anko-chan and I have a date, so could you please call her down please, he asked. Kurenai could only nod dumbly before calling out to Anko without taking her eyes off the blonde. That you, Naruto-kun? He heard reply from upstairs. Yeah, I have a great idea for a restaurant. Okay, I'm coming down now. Soon Anko came down the stairs, wearing a purple dress that reached to her shins. It was held up by one strap on her right shoulder and had a slit up the right side. Her hair was down from its usually pineapple ponytail and she had a single golden earring pierced on her left ear. Wow, Naruto sighed out, getting a blush from the woman in question. Holding her head up high, she strode to man and interlocked her right arm with his left. Thanks, Naruto-kun. Now Kurenai-chan, I'll be back at 11 p.m, see you later. Anko said as waved to her friend goodbye and started to walk through the streets, her date right next to her. When they had gone round the corner, Kurenai closed the door to the apartment and went to bed, deciding to get some sleep, though her dreams were about the blonde man she had seen a moment ago. Time skip. Golden Leaf. Wow, you're taking me here. This is the top restaurant in Konoha. I sure hope they do dango though. Anko finished in a disappointed tone, thinking if her favorite food would not be served here since it wasn't known to be a very fancy food. Naruto chuckled at his date's prediction. Dango would always be her one weakness when it came to things that weren't ninja related, and to him it was one of the cutest things about her. Yugito had a similar thing for fish and he always enjoyed the pouch she would pull when she couldn't have any. Seems good so far, he thought as they approached the entrance to the Golden Leaf. A waitress was waiting near the entrance, which upon recognizing her caused Naruto to grin. Table for two, sir? The waitress asked with a knowing smirk. Yes, madam. Could we have the VIP table please? Certainly, sir. Please follow me. The waitress then pulled out two menus and led to Duo past the astonished looks being sent their way by the other patrons. The looks though were soon replaced with negative sneers, glares or other kinds of looks that could be associated with dissatisfaction. They ignored the looks though Anko had stiffened slightly before Naruto assured her nothing would happen. After they had taken their seats, the waitress asked what they would be having. I think I will have the yakizakana with a side order of miso soup and I would like some of your best sake available, Naruto said as the waitress then turned towards Anko, who ordered the yakisoba with a side order of dango and also sake. After the waitress took their orders, she retrieved the menus and went to the kitchen to pass on the order, leaving the two to talk for a little while. So what's the final conclusion on the negotiations? Anko asked. Neutral with benefits. We will provide medical assistance throughout the war and will fight the enemy, but that is all we are doing. If a team of shinobi are under attack and my men are able to aid them, they do not have to help. They may help if given permission or if they can give a good reason to save them. Other than that, we are to stay out of each other's way. If a ninja from the alliance commits a crime against us, then he will be under our jurisdiction. The reverse can be said if one of our soldiers commits a crime against the alliance. Not that that is likely to happen, hopefully. I mean, I would rather have my time spent trying to win this war and leave, rather than constantly having to punish people for crimes. Naruto replied with a tired look. Anko was about to ask another question but was interrupted by the arrival of their food. She decided then it was best to leave it at that and instead focus on having a good time. A couple of hours passed before the two finished, paid for their meals, Naruto paying for both at his insistence, and made their way back to Anko's shared apartment. I take this as goodbye then? Anko asked as she leaned her back against the door and crossed her arms, with a smirk adorning her face. Not forever. Just for a little while. After all, I need to start taking part in this war that my nation has been dragged into, but I promise to take you out again at some point. Who knows, you might as well invite Kurenai to come along next time. Naruto replied cheekily, adding a wink that caused Anko to blush at the implications. She then uncrossed her arms and turned around quickly to open the door. When she was in the doorway, she quickly spun round and gave Naruto a long kiss that initially shocked the blonde, though he promptly returned the kiss. After a moment, the two separated, panting slightly. That was for luck, and please be careful. You are so far the only one who hasn't wanted to date me just to get into my pants, and I don't know what I'll do if something bad happens to you, she said softly before closing the door, leaving Naruto outside contemplating on her words. I will be careful. He said to no one in particular, sighing at the end and running his right hand down his face. Have a nice evening, sir, he heard a voice say rhetorically. Looking to his right, he saw the waitress from before walk towards him, a smirk plastered on her face. It was okay. Anyway, are we ready for the operation, Captain Fujita? The woman's smirk widened as she pulled off her wig and took out her contact lenses. Yes, sir. Everything is ready. Naruto gave a smirk of his own as he tapped his right wrist with his left index and middle fingers. His clothes phased for a moment before they disappeared entirely, revealing his armor, weapons and trench coat. Then let's get going. Time skip. Konoha Market Square, 12 a.m. The place was a large open area and paved so that the merchants, both foreign and domestic, could sell their goods and services. Recently the place had been used by many spies in Konoha, as the civilian council was able to pass a law that forbid ninja from patrolling the area as it scared the customers. Naturally Tsunade had been against the idea, as well as the clan heads, but once again they had been outvoted by the civilian council, the then still active Danzo and the village elders. Due to the lack of ninja around, many spies saw it as the best opportunity to report back to their superiors and were able to give them many secrets about Konoha that could have been prevented if the law hadn't been placed. It had also been used for the civilian council members and village elders to meet up with their less legal contractors. When Naruto planned out the operation, his briefing was interrupted by the civilians and elders barging in and telling him smugly that ninja were not allowed in the market square, hoping to keep him from discovering their illegal activities. In return, he had grinned at them and replied, "Well, it's a good thing my subordinates are soldiers and not ninja." He then proceeded to turn his back to the group of stunned council members and elders. Realizing they had lost, they had harumped and walked out of the briefing, many of the room's occupants snickering as they left. Presently the square was playing host to 20 Otogakur ninja who were tasked with finding and eliminating any defenseless supporters of the UWN, then kill the UWN group's leader. It was a fairly easy task to find the supporters and only had to send 3 ninja to deal with them, but so far no word had been sent back about their status. This caused the Oto Nin to be tense and nervous for the time being. Everything ready? Yes, General Uzumaki. Good. Now let's begin Operation Pest Extermination. Sir. Yes, sir. At that moment all of the Oto Nin were blinded by spotlights that had been placed up on all of the buildings. The light exposed the Oto Nin, taking away their cover of darkness. In addition, it kept Naruto's own men hidden from view as the lights kept the Oto Nin from finding them. Oto Nin, you have tried to hurt people who are close to me, and for that your lives are forfeit. Any last words? Naruto shouted. He stood up on the roof of one of the buildings staring impassively at the Oto Nin below him in an at-ease stance. The Oto Nin were startled by the voice and desperately tried to locate the voice but couldn't due to the intense light. Everywhere they looked was covered in white, some trying to cover their eyes so that they didn't go blind. Who are you? Show yourself. Those were some of the outbursts that the more hardened ninja could give, though the rest were trembling, shaking, in fear and started increasing their efforts to locate the man who they were ordered to kill. It was then that they noticed that a shadow had been cast over them from somebody standing in front of one of the spotlights. Up on one of the roofs stood Naruto in full combat gear and trench coat, though his arms weren't in the sleeves. His posture was one of aggressiveness, his left hand fingering his sword attached to his left side and a glare that if looks could kill would have already sent the Oto Nin 6 feet under. When all of the Oto Nin recognized the man as their target, 5 of them transformed into Zetsu clones and launched themselves at the blonde standing before them with a war cry. Despite the imminent danger, Naruto made no motion to move or give any orders. In fact, he seemed to not even be looking at the clones that were getting closer to him by the second. 10 meters, 6 meters, 4 meters, 2 meters, ... Bang, 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 bang. Naruto sidestepped the now corpses that flew past him and landed in heap behind him, each with a bullet implanted in their skulls. The shooters were Chaitak intervention wielding snipers, all 5 of them firing their shots in synchronization. After the shots rang out, many of the windows were opened to reveal soldiers carrying Colt M16A2 rifles and taking aim at the, now surrounded, Oto Nin. The rooftops around the square also became populated with soldiers rushing out and taking positions for battle, but this time with a mixture of M249 saw light machine guns and M32 multiple grenade launchers. Seeing that the Oto Nin were trapped, Naruto decided to give them one last talk before continuing. When you put on that Oto Hitai 8, you signed a silent contract to serve your nation and leader. That leader has sent you here on a mission that was almost guaranteed death. Die knowing that you failed a mission for a bunch of lunatics. Naruto then turned around and walked away from the slaughter that was to occur. As soon as Naruto had finished speaking, all of the soldiers opened fire. The riflemen, machine gunners and grenade launchers obliterating the Oto Nin. Some were hit multiple times, some were hit only once, and some were blown to oblivion. Any ninja that made it to the edge of the square were picked off by the snipers. The shots also caused many small lights that would allow one to see the battle from far away and was accompanied by the screaming of the dying men and women. By the end of the massacre, it had started raining, making the square run with blood covering it almost entirely. Corpses and body parts littered the ground with the heads in a permanent look of pain and fear. Craters both large and small caused by multiple explosions and bullets were made in the ground. The Kages and Mifune stared at the scene in horror and glanced at the Uzukage to see not a single ounce of regret on the man's face. To them it was one of the most terrible things they had seen, just beating the shinobi wars. Why didn't you spare any of them? They would have had information that we could have used, Onoki said. Naruto looked at the Tsuchikage but noticed that he wasn't looking at him. Following the man's gaze, he saw that he was still looking over the square where the battle had commenced. Both Akatsuki and Orochimaru never give vital information to these kinds of subordinates. They would have likely only have known their mission details and nothing more. Plus, remember the reason for why I did this with only my soldiers, with me and you tenfold. I meant what I said, this was an example. He replied nonchalantly, though the Kages and Mifune turned to look at him in shock. What do you mean? Said an example. We're the only ones who witnessed this. Tsunade cried out, wondering what happened to the boy who tried to avoid killing when it wasn't necessary. His response was to look at a tree in the far distance. Following his gaze, they froze when they caught a brief look at the dark half of Zetsu as he melded into the tree and disappeared. That was why, and don't go thinking about capturing him now. That man is a prodigy when it comes to getting out of situations. The best way to deal with him will be to bait him to an area where chakra is cut off, then take him. For now though, I will be returning to my transports to go back to headquarters. I will also be having Tyuki and Ayame Ichiraku accompanying me as the two would like to move and gain citizenship to the UWN. Can I trust you Tsunade Dono to make sure the civilian council don't try to use your ninja to forcibly take them back? Naruto asked the Hokage. Tsunade nodded though as she was still trying to imagine the orange ball of sunshine that convinced her to become Hokage in the first place. What happened to you Naruto? Seeing this Naruto shook his head and left the leaders of the Shinobi Alliance to talk amongst themselves.